7 million years of human history are coming to an end. This is not due to nuclear war or an alien invasion, but rather it comes from the very creators of humanity. To decide the fate of mankind, the gods held a council at the Parliament of Valhalla. Here, Zeus asked the other deities whether humanity should be allowed to exist for another 1,000 years or if an end should be put to them. The vast majority of the gods agreed that humanity needed to be eradicated because, over the past millennium, humans have not only engaged in endless wars but also destroyed the Earth's environment. Following the majority opinion, Zeus decided to exterminate humanity. However, just as Zeus was about to strike the gavel of judgment, the demigod Valkyrie Brunhilde appeared and stopped him. She boldly stated her opposition to the consensus of all the gods present. Brunhilde agreed that humanity had caused numerous disasters on Earth, but argued that erasing them completely for that reason was too cruel. Therefore, she proposed that the gods give humanity a chance to prove themselves through a trial, a one-on-one tournament between humans and gods known as Ragnarok. The rules stated that each side would select 13 representatives to fight each other. If the human faction won 7 matches, they would be allowed to live for another 1,000 years. Conversely, if they lost 7 matches, their fate would be sealed by the gods. Upon hearing this, the gods dismissed the idea as utter nonsense. Previously, they had only joked about the Battle of Ragnarok for amusement, believing that no human could ever possess the strength to defeat a deity. Seeing their reaction, Brunhilde provoked them by asking if they were simply too scared to fight humans. She added that if this was the case, she would withdraw her proposal and apologize. Her younger sister, Gel, was speechless at this massive gamble, fearing that Brunhilde would be destroyed by the gods before she could even save humanity. However, Brunhilde knew that the gods were prideful and highly valued their honor. Losing to humans would be an unbearable humiliation for them. Zeus, on the other hand, laughed heartily and found Brunhilde's proposal incredibly amusing. He invited the other gods to participate in Ragnarok to demonstrate their absolute power to mankind. Immediately after, Zeus slammed his gavel, officially accepting the war against humanity. The entire hall of Valhalla erupted in cheers as they eagerly anticipated the battles. Consequently, Zeus instructed Brunhilde to quickly select humanity's strongest representatives. Having once been human herself, Brunhilde promised to choose the 13 most exceptional individuals from the 7 million years of human history. Sometime later, the tournament between humans and gods commenced at the Valhalla arena. Countless humans and deities were present to cheer for their respective factions. The first representative for the gods was Thor, the thunder god, widely regarded as the strongest deity in the Nordic pantheon. In his hands rested a hammer capable of shattering continents in the blink of an eye. Gull panicked, wondering how humanity could possibly win when the gods sent out such a powerhouse right from the start. But Brunhilde revealed that humanity's first fighter was also an incredibly powerful warrior, the most ferocious berserker she had ever encountered. That man was Lu Bu, the strongest hero of China from the Three Kingdoms period. Entering the arena, Lu Bu rode his legendary steed, red hair, carrying a completely fearless demeanor. However, a monk in the stands was anxiously praying to the gods, prompting Brunhilde to tell him to be quiet, pointing out the absurdity of praying to their current enemies. Down in the arena, the thunder god cast aside his cloak to prepare for the fight, while Lu Bu summoned his weapon, the Sky Piercer, ready for the clash. Cheering for Lu Bu were the 3 sworn brothers, Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei, along with countless loyal soldiers. They were eagerly waiting for their lord to crush the thunder god. Soon after, the announcer, Heimdall, blew his apocalyptic horn, signaling the official start of the Great War between humans and gods. Instantly, both warriors lowered their weapons and stood completely still for a moment. Then, they slowly approached each other without any defensive stance. The gods were furious at Lu Bu for seemingly looking down on his divine opponent, while Brunhilde was highly satisfied that Lu Bu was exuding the aura of a superior fighter. As they came face to face, a terrifying surge of energy was released. Lu Bu immediately raised his halberd and launched a direct assault at Thor. In response, Thor used his massive hammer to block Lu Bu's strike. However, Lu Bu let out a fierce roar to boost his strength, pushing the thunder god backward. Not stopping there, Lu Bu charged forward again with his weapon aimed straight at Thor. But this time, Thor used his hammer to deflect the attack and knock Lu Bu back. Both of these seasoned warriors possessed extraordinary strength, and shared the ability to finish their opponents with a single fatal blow, making the outcome of the match entirely unpredictable. The human faction was immensely proud that Lu Bu could fight on equal footing with a mighty god like Thor. However, according to Zeus, Thor still had a vast amount of hidden power yet to be unleashed. Suddenly, Thor leaped backward and began channeling lightning into his hands. Brunhilde grew very anxious upon seeing this, recognizing it as the thunder god's ultimate technique. Once enough lightning was gathered, Thor transferred it all into his hammer. He then gripped the weapon tightly and leaned all the way back to gain momentum. The gods noted that, although Lu Bu was a mere mortal, Thor was going all out because he respected an opponent who could match his strength. In the past, Thor hailed from Asgard, a land surrounded by towering walls to defend against giant invasions. The guardian angels of this realm found their patrol duties incredibly boring, as Asgard was an excessively peaceful place. Suddenly, a massive tremor struck, and a horde of 66 heavily armed and combat-enhanced giants launched a full-scale assault. The angels' defensive formations were quickly broken. The citizens inside believed they were safe, but the walls were swiftly demolished, and the angels were mercilessly slaughtered. Up until then, the gods had always assumed the giants acted alone, leading to arrogance and a weakened defense system. Because of this coordinated attack, Asgard was pushed to the brink of annihilation. While everyone was paralyzed by fear, the thunder god appeared with his hammer. With a single swing, Thor pulverized the giants standing before him. He then leaned back to unleash his ultimate lethal technique, annihilating the rest of the invaders. After wiping them out, Thor felt no joy, only intense boredom, as the giants were too weak to even warrant his attention. The glorious feat of the thunder god was passed down by other deities, and they named his ultimate move Thor's hammer. Now, Thor was utilizing this very technique against a mortal like Lu Bu, leading the gods to believe that the human's demise was certain. After leaning back, Thor smashed his hammer forward with devastating force, causing the entire Valhalla arena to shake violently. The sheer energy radiating from the impact forced anyone standing near the center of the arena to be pushed back. However, when the dust settled, everyone was left in pure astonishment because Lu Bu was still alive. Not only did he survive, but he also used his weapon to draw blood from the thunder god. Following this strike, Lu Bu laughed uproariously, as it was the first time his blade had ever reached a divine being. Thor, remaining perfectly calm, told Lu Bu that it was a pity he was only human. Thor stated that if they were of the same race, they would undoubtedly be comrades in arms. According to historical records, Lu Bu hailed from the autonomous region of Inner Mongolia, and since birth, he possessed strength that surpassed human limits. Therefore, he constantly traveled in search of stronger opponents to fight. Anyone who stood in Lu Bu's way was utterly defeated. Through countless battles, Lu Bu's reputation echoed throughout all of China. After more than 30 years of warfare, Lu Bu realized that there was no one left on Earth worthy of being his opponent. Consequently, he willingly allowed himself to be captured by Cao Cao and was sentenced to execution. In his final moments, Lu Bu even pleaded with Cao Cao to execute him quickly, as he had grown completely weary of a life without a worthy rival. Returning to the present, Lu Bu had finally found an opponent against whom he could fight with all his might. Zeus and his subordinates were deeply surprised that Lu Bu was still holding his ground. According to Zeus, Thor's hammer could destroy anything it touched, yet Lu Bu's halberd remained completely intact in his hands without a single chip. After a moment of thought, he realized that Brunhilde must have done something to enhance Lu Bu's combat power. It turned out that before Ragnarok began, Brunhilde knew humanity was no match for the divine. The gods wielded divine weapons forged from divine power, so even if Lu Bu was the strongest human warrior, his mortal weapon would be nothing more than a toy against the gods. To level the playing field, Brunhilde summoned all 13 demigod sisters, known as the Valkyries, and under her command, they would assist the human faction in combat. Brunhilde called upon a Valkyrie named Randgriz. After thoroughly questioning her about the Thunder God's equipment, Randgriz revealed that Thor possessed a pair of gauntlets capable of defending against any attack, along with a hammer that could wipe out an entire army in the blink of an eye. Hearing this, Brunhilde considered the Thunder God's overpowered weapons unfair. To overcome him, she asked Randgriz to sacrifice her body and transform into a divine weapon for Lu Bu to help him defeat Thor. Immediately, Randgriz gathered all of Lu Bu's memories to shape a suitable weapon for him. transforming into the Sky Piercer, the very weapon that had made his name famous across every battlefield. Therefore, Lu Bu was now thrilled, fully enjoying the atmosphere of the battle because he faced a formidable opponent and held an indestructible divine weapon. As Lu Bu charged forward to attack, Thor used his gauntlet to block it, assuming it was highly durable, but within seconds, it completely shattered. Brunhilde's choice of Rangriz had a clear purpose, as the name Rangriz translates to shield breaker. The audience was utterly shocked that Lu Bu could destroy Thor's divine items so easily. The human faction immediately believed that Lu Bu would be the first to perform a miracle. His soldiers beat their drums loudly to cheer for their lord, while his strategist, Chen Gong, shed tears of pride for his general. On the gods' side, they realized that although the Valkyries' duty was merely to guide souls, they were now using their power to become weapons for humanity. Zeus and the other deities quickly understood that the Valkyries were staging a rebellion. However, Zeus did not show any anger. Instead, he felt incredibly excited, looking toward Brunhilde with thrilling anticipation. Down in the arena, Lu Bu continued his relentless assault, inflicting multiple wounds on Thor. However, at that moment, Thor's hammer began to emit an immense heat, causing Brunhilde great anxiety. Streams of magma flowed from the hammer, making it glow vibrantly, accompanied by loud thumping sounds echoing from within that were clear enough for anyone to hear. It was the heartbeat of the hammer. It had awakened and acted much like a truly living creature. Everyone wondered if the thunder god could still wield the hammer now that he had lost one of his gauntlets. Zeus explained that the gauntlets were not meant to help Thor lift the hammer. They were used to seal his own terrifying strength. Without the gauntlets, Thor would have destroyed the hammer before it had the chance to awaken. Immediately after, the thunder god threw his remaining gauntlet to the ground, its extreme weight creating a massive crater. Consequently, the human faction began to grow anxious, while the divine faction secretly rejoiced. Thor gripped his awakened hammer, called out Lu Bu's name directly, and declared his hope that the mortal could survive this upcoming strike. As the arena audience cheered thunderously, although her younger sister Gel was terrified, believing these were the final 13 humans before mankind's extinction, Brunhilde laughed heartily. She firmly believed that these were the 13 Godslayers who would beat the divine faction into absolute submission. Meanwhile, on the god side, Zeus had also received his faction's roster and found it highly amusing to see his own name among the fighters. Down in the arena, Thor continued to channel his energy into his hammer, preparing to unleash his ultimate lethal technique. The audience watched in absolute awe, thrilled to witness the power of the awakened hammer for the very first time. Instantly, Thor hurled the violently spinning weapon straight at Lu Bu. According to legend, this throw possessed absolute accuracy and was impossible to dodge. However, as the hammer closed in, Lu Bu leaned entirely backward, allowing the massive weapon to fly right past him and up toward the stands. Standing back up with a thrilling, joyful smile, Lu Bu charged straight at Thor, who appeared completely defenseless. But just as the human warrior raised his halberd to strike, the hammer boomeranged back. Reacting with incredible agility, Lu Bu leaped high into the air, spun around, and deflected the hammer back toward Thor, forcing the thunder god to exert effort just to catch his own weapon. Seizing this brief opening, Lu Bu lunged directly at Thor once more to deliver a fatal blow. Yet, Thor's true purpose in throwing the weapon was to harness its immense centrifugal force for his decisive counterattack. Aiming squarely at Lu Bu's face, Thor brought the hammer down with devastating power, unleashing a terrifying earthquake that violently shook the entire arena. The blinding light radiating from the clash made it impossible for the audience to see anything. When the light faded, Lu Bu was still bracing himself, holding back Thor's hammer. Everyone was astounded by Lu Bu's extraordinary strength. Even Odin's crows thought they were dreaming, unable to believe that Thor's attack had been stopped. But Brunhilde noticed Lu Bu's legs trembling under the immense pressure, and the human faction's joy quickly shifted to extreme worry. Moments later, Lu Bu's legs broke, causing him to bleed profusely. Seeing the danger, Lu Bu desperately pushed Thor's hammer away to regain his balance, but his other leg also gave out, forcing him to lean on his weapon just to stand. This was the first time Lu Bu had ever been so heavily wounded. The divine audience rejoiced at this sight, while Zeus relished seeing the first human being crushed by the gods, remarking that the battle would end soon since Lu Bu was forced to his knees. Yet, Lu Bu maintained a proud and fearless expression, even as Thor prepared to swing his hammer and take his life. Right then, Brunhilde heard the sound of galloping hooves beneath her feet, realizing it was too soon for humanity to give up. There was a saying, "Among men, Lu Bu, among steeds, red hair," and this time, Red Hair charged directly into the arena to fight alongside its master. Even as an animal, Red Hair knew its master had fought valiantly, prompting Thor to lower his hammer and wait to see what would happen next. In the stands, Chen Gong was deeply moved that Red Hair had not given up, and he rallied the soldiers to chant Lu Bu's name. The audience joined in, calling out to him and hoping he would rise to continue the fight. Shiva deemed humans a heartless bunch for wanting a crippled man to stand back up, but other gods wanted to see exactly how resilient this human could be. Amidst the crowd's roaring cheers, Lu Bu used his weapon to push himself up and let out a loud battle cry that completely electrified the audience. Red Hair reared up beside him, cheering for its master, while the Thunder God smiled joyfully, glad that his opponent hadn't surrendered. Red Hair then became Lu Bu's new legs, allowing him to stand firm once again. Since childhood, Lu Bu had witnessed a tree burned to ash by a lightning strike, which filled him with excitement rather than fear. In his innocent mind, he believed there was a tremendously strong entity in the sky waiting for him, and now he had to use every ounce of his strength to fight that very entity to the bitter end. Heimdall wondered if Lu Bu was violating the one-on-one rule, but Zeus declared that Red Hair had become an extension of Lu Bu's body, making it acceptable. Before clashing again, Lu Bu asked Red Hair one last time if it was willing to entrust its life to its master. Red Hair neighed fiercely, bringing joy to the human faction, as Lu Bu rode circling the Thunder God to find an opening for an attack. While the audience couldn't fathom his plan, Lu Bu gripped his halberd tightly, preparing to deliver a decisive strike. Despite possessing unmatched strength, he always sought to perfect his martial techniques, training relentlessly because he knew he would one day face his greatest opponent. He had swung his weapon over 100,000 times to achieve absolute mastery, discarding broken weapons to grab new ones. Eventually, he perfected a devastating technique known as Sky Eater, capable of splitting the very sky in two with a single swing. It was a pity that Lu Bu died before he could ever use this overpowered technique, but after thousands of years, he finally had the chance to unleash it, combined with his ultimate Valkyrie weapon. The Thunder God was ecstatic, as it had been a long time since an opponent thrilled him this much, and his awakened hammer pulsated rapidly, wanting to release all of its power. For Lu Bu, the next attack would be his greatest killing blow, gripping Red Hair so tightly that the steed coughed up blood. Thor threw his hammer into a spin, caught it to build momentum, and unleashed his awakened ultimate move, while Lu Bu unleashed his Sky Eater. When the two ultimate techniques collided, the Valhalla arena lit up once more, and the two weapons clashed, producing a deafening sound. In the end, Lu Bu was critically injured, and his Valkyrie halberd was blown back. Seeing her sister sacrificed, Brunhilde grieved deeply and grew even more resentful of the gods. Down in the arena, Thor stood firm, while Lu Bu's body was mangled. However, Lu Bu cast aside his severed arm and looked completely fulfilled, having fought with everything he had. With his final ounce of strength, he rode toward Thor. The joyous face of his youth as the strongest warrior appeared, and Thor did not hesitate to swing his hammer, cleanly executing his opponent. Thus, the first battle of Ragnarok ended with a victory for the divine faction. Lu Bu was defeated by Thor in 16 minutes and 28 seconds. Up in the stands, Zeus appeared immensely pleased, and the other gods were equally thrilled, for it had been a long time since they witnessed such a fiery battle. The three sworn brothers, Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei, were deeply saddened by Lu Bu's sacrifice and raised their cups together to send him off to the afterlife. Meanwhile, the spectators on the god side loudly boasted that humanity was nowhere near ready to challenge the divine. Gel was infuriated by this, unable to believe that beings who called themselves gods could be so arrogant. Brunhilde, however, did not linger on sadness. She immediately set off to prepare for the next match. After winning the first match, Thor left the arena, but the Thunder God's face showed no signs of joy. He had genuinely come to regard Lu Bu as a friend, and visibly mourned his passing. Shortly after, Red Hair and Lu Bu's loyal soldiers, vowing to follow their master, charged collectively at the Thunder God despite the match being over. Believing he should offer a final tribute to his friend Lu Bu, Thor raised his hammer, and sent Lu Bu's loyal subordinates to join him in the afterlife. After they fell to the thunder god, Gull asked Brunhilde what would happen to those who were destroyed out there. Brunhilde informed her younger sister that this was a battle of souls. When their souls shattered, they would turn to dust and could never be restored. Therefore, Lu Bu, his soldiers, and the Valkyrie Rangriz would disappear forever, unable to be reincarnated. Hearing this, Gull became furious that Brunhilde remained so calm, even though their dear sister had just sacrificed herself on the battlefield. For Brunhilde, however, grieving would solve nothing now. To defeat the gods, she knew greater sacrifices might be necessary, as the fate of humanity was always her top priority. Heading inside to prepare for the next round, Brunhilde encouraged Gull not to dwell on the past but to look toward the future and select the most suitable candidate. Gull remained highly anxious, noting that even someone as strong as Lu Bu had been defeated. Yet, this time, Brunhilde decided to choose the individual with the deepest hatred for the gods, a special person marked in her records with a string of zeros and a single one at the end. Although the arena had been devastated, the gods restored it to proceed with the next match. Up in the stands, spectators from both the human and divine sides argued relentlessly, each entirely convinced that their faction would claim victory this time. Soon after, Heimdall introduced humanity's next representative. As the vault doors opened, this figure emerged from beneath the ground, carried to the top of the arena by a rising pillar alongside a gathering of various animals. Heimdall announced that this was the very first human created by the gods, yet he was now standing up to defy his creators. The man then leaped down, completely unclothed, save for a fortuitously placed leaf to cover himself. This man was Adam, the progenitor of humanity. After eating the forbidden fruit, Adam was convicted by the gods and banished to the mortal realm. Because of this, Adam harbored a deep grudge against the gods and was determined to settle the score. When humanity saw their forefather, they were overjoyed, but the gods dismissed Adam as a scrawny, weak youth. They assumed that if even Lu Bu had perished, Adam would likely be defeated in a matter of minutes. However, on the god's side, the goddess Aphrodite found Adam to be quite charming, remarking that she would gladly claim him for herself if he were among the divine. At that moment, Heimdall received a notification that the gods had changed their fighting order. The figure who appeared in the arena was Hermes. However, he was merely there to play a musical piece for the grand entrance of Zeus, who would be Adam's opponent in the next round. Seeing this, everyone thought the organizers were playing a joke, as Zeus appeared to be nothing more than a frail old man stepping into the arena to fight Adam. Before the battle commenced, Zeus asked Hermes to play a tune so he could perform a warm-up dance. Up in the stands, the other gods continuously chanted his name, hailing him as the godfather of the cosmos since he had created the universe itself. Conversely, the human faction felt shivers down their spines, watching someone with a body like dry firewood putting on such a show. However, as the performance concluded, Zeus's body unexpectedly expanded. His muscles bulged massively, transforming him into a giant. The divine audience cheered thunderously, while Brunhilde became extremely anxious. She and Gull had always assumed Zeus was the final boss who would appear last. They never expected him to unexpectedly step in and fight as early as the second match. Although Zeus danced vigorously and showed immense excitement, Adam displayed absolutely no fear. As it turned out, the god originally scheduled to fight Adam was Shiva. Shiva was burning with fighting spirit until Zeus stepped in to usurp his turn, which angered Shiva so much that he nearly fought Zeus on the spot. However, Zeus possessed terrifying physical strength and forced Shiva down with just one hand. Frustrated, Shiva challenged Zeus to settle the matter right there to see who got to fight Adam. But after a tense standoff, Shiva realized he was at a disadvantage. Thus, he allowed Zeus to take his place in the arena, though he remained bitter and swore to test his strength against Zeus another time. With Zeus vacating his chairman's seat, his son Ares temporarily took over. Down below, the two warriors prepared to begin the next battle. Seeing that Adam was unarmed, Zeus wondered what his Valkyrie weapon would be, noting that without one, Adam would be defeated in an instant. But Adam casually replied that his weapon was just being delivered to the arena. High in the sky, a woman was riding a Pegasus. She was a Valkyrie named Ragnarok, carefully chosen by Brunhilde as the most suitable weapon for Adam. Ragnarok jumped down, reaching out her hand to Adam, and the two displayed a unified resolve to fight against the gods. Ragnarok immediately transformed her body, enveloping Adam's arm, and as the light faded, she had turned into a knuckle duster. Everyone was surprised, but Adam was highly satisfied, and Zeus was thrilled that Adam seemed to be a hand-to-hand brawler just like him. At that moment, Heimdall officially declared the start of the next match. Before they clashed, Adam casually addressed Zeus as an old man and asked where his weapon was. Naturally, with the might of a god, Zeus required no weapons. However, the stands began to murmur at Adam's blatant disrespect toward a great deity like Zeus, who silently swore to land every punch to wash away the insult. Zeus instantly charged at Adam at the speed of light, unleashing a lethal punch, but Adam, with extreme reflexes, lightly dodged his head to the side, causing Zeus to miss. Adam's descendants felt immensely proud that their father could go toe-to-toe with Zeus. Meanwhile, Zeus's son deemed humans a foolish bunch for celebrating a single dodged attack as if it were a full victory. Down in the arena, Zeus launched a continuous barrage of punches but failed to land a single hit on Adam. Even when Zeus executed a rapid combo known as Meteor Jab, Adam evaded it masterfully without showing the slightest hint of fear. Realizing punches weren't working, Zeus switched to using his legs, which were as deadly as axes. A direct hit would likely kill Adam instantly. Yet, Adam swiftly jumped high into the air just as Zeus delivered the kick. Zeus began to grow annoyed that Adam was only dodging and refusing to attack, warning him that if he kept evading, he would inevitably take a hit sooner or later. Adam fully understood this, so he immediately delivered a clean strike to Zeus's face, drawing blood. The god could not believe someone could execute a move faster than him. Adam then unleashed a continuous assault, mirroring the exact movements Zeus had used earlier. Adam even replicated the Meteor Jab, throwing punches at a fraction of a millisecond, causing Zeus to take a severe beating. Finally, Adam used the divine axe kick to chop down the god's leg. Despite absorbing numerous blows, Zeus appeared overwhelmingly delighted, wearing a menacing grin. Gull was astounded that Adam could utilize all of the god's techniques. Brunhilde explained that since Adam was the very first human created in the image of the gods, he possessed the ability to perfectly copy any movement the gods made. The power dwelling within Adam's eyes was known as divine reflection, allowing him to flawlessly mimic any technique just by looking at it. Zeus seemed to still disbelieve this power, so he performed a flurry of wild movements. Then, he ran circles around Adam, looking for an opening to attack. However, when he threw a kick, Adam dodged it effortlessly. Using divine reflection, Adam copied Zeus's exact stance from moments ago and delivered a kick straight to the god's face, sending him flying dozens of meters away. Everyone witnessing this could not believe that an omnipotent deity like Zeus was taking such a severe beating. Zeus was at a loss as to how to fight Adam, because looking at the human felt like fighting a mirror image of himself. To make matters worse, Adam taunted him, calling him a frail old man, which left the audience roaring with laughter. Enraged, Zeus flexed his might, massively expanding his physique, and blew into his hand to prepare for a devastating ultimate attack. Long ago, when the universe was newly formed, a young Zeus defeated his father in a battle to determine the most powerful god in the cosmos. But right before his father was defeated, he managed to land a blow on Zeus's jaw. Strangely, even Zeus could not see the attack coming. After years of training, however, Zeus successfully mastered his father's technique, naming this ultimate move the fist that surpassed time. As Zeus clenched his fist, time seemed to stop entirely. Moving at incomprehensible speeds, Zeus charged straight at Adam. However, Adam not only copied this technique in time, but also punched Zeus even harder than his father had. When time resumed, everyone was stunned to see Zeus lying face down before Adam. Seeing his father continuously pummeled, the god of war Ares remarked that almost no one could track techniques like the Meteor Jab or the Divine Axe. Ares himself could see them clearly, even if only for a fleeting moment. In the fight against Adam, Ares clearly saw Zeus throw a punch, but inexplicably, by the end of the exchange, Zeus's face was struck and snapped back by Adam. Ares wondered if Adam somehow possessed a speed even more terrifying than Zeus. Hermes chimed in, noting that Adam's copying ability was far from simple. In the blink of an eye, Hermes had observed Adam slightly sidestep and counterattack, leaving the old god unable to react in time. Realizing Hermes could see even faster than him, Ares grew furious and wanted to fight his brother right then and there, but to save face for their father, they held off. Down in the arena, Zeus struggled to get back up, prompting Heimdall to loudly declare this the first miracle in the history of the universe. At this point, Brunhilde explained that Adam's driving force stemmed primarily from his hatred for the gods. Long ago, Adam lived in the Garden of Eden alongside many other creatures. This was his paradise, where he had everything he could ever want. But one day, the gods held a trial for Adam's wife, Eve. A serpent god accused her of eating the forbidden fruit. In truth, the serpent had tried to assault Eve, but failed. At that moment, a forbidden fruit fell on his head, sparking an idea. He took a bite of the fruit and then pinned the blame entirely on Eve. Although the serpent's words were sheer slander, Eve was merely a human, so the gods immediately believed the lie and demanded her exile from Eden. The serpent god was overjoyed that he had exacted his revenge on Eve. Just then, the courtroom doors swung open and a battered guard was thrown to the floor. Eve was completely surprised to see that the person entering was Adam. He brazenly walked before the gods, holding 2 baskets of forbidden fruit. While they fumed at his insolence, Adam bit into an apple, immediately spat it out, and complained that it was too sour. He proceeded to take bites out of the remaining apples, tossing them all to the ground, leaving the gods seething in silent fury but too intimidated to act. Adam then walked up to Eve and told her that if she was banished from heaven, he would gladly go with her. This brought Eve immense joy, while the serpent god felt deeply insulted. The serpent immediately enlarged his body into a giant lizard, preparing to devour Adam. But Adam also wanted to eliminate the creature for making Eve cry. The serpent used its claws to attack, but Adam instantly copied the technique. Within seconds, the serpent god was sliced into pieces by Adam. Afterward, Adam took Eve's hand to leave heaven, promising that they would build a paradise of their own. Now, facing the gods in battle, Adam's hatred had resurfaced, which was why Zeus had been beaten to the point of being unable to move. Initially, Brunhilde thought this old god would be an incredibly difficult opponent, but now she laughed triumphantly, declaring it a miraculous victory for humanity. However, her expression quickly changed when Zeus suddenly sprang back to his feet. Although his neck had been snapped backward, the old god simply twisted his head back into place. Up in the stands, the divine spectators cheered wildly, seeing that Zeus had not perished. Yet, he appeared to have lost a significant amount of stamina after using the meteor jab and taking Adam's punches. Zeus then remarked that he no longer saw the flame of hatred in Adam's eyes, and he asked for the real reason Adam wanted to destroy the gods. Adam plainly replied that he wasn't there to exact revenge for the past. He was fighting solely to protect his children, humanity. Hearing this, the human audience felt immense pride for their forefather, Adam, and everyone united in prayer for their father's victory. Zeus seemed rather jealous that Adam was receiving such fervent prayers and support from the crowd. Adam warned Zeus to be very careful, because the next strike might put him in a body bag. No longer underestimating his opponent, Zeus promised to unleash his full power to fight him. Immediately, Zeus strained with all his might to compress his muscles. The audience thought the old man was losing his mind, but the god of mischief, Loki, pointed out that it had been millions of years since he last saw Zeus enter his final form. Thus, Adam was extremely lucky to face Zeus going all out. After a period of intense physical contortion, Zeus finally stabilized, and the sheer power radiating from him meant Adam could no longer be careless. Even the human spectators began to tremble in fear, with children crying uncontrollably. Brunhilde felt her own limbs shaking as they sensed the terrifying power of Zeus's final form. Zeus had compressed all his muscle mass to generate an immense source of internal energy. By releasing it, he could deliver strikes faster and stronger than ever before. However, Hermes estimated that the old god could maintain this form for a maximum of only 5 minutes, wondering if he could defeat Adam before time ran out. Zeus lunged forward, unleashing his first volley of punches at Adam. But Adam continued to use divine reflection to copy every single one of Zeus's techniques. No matter how Zeus attacked, Adam flawlessly mirrored it and countered. Consequently, the match continued to tilt in Adam's favor. While Gull thought Adam was guaranteed to win, Brunhilde noticed something was terribly wrong. Down in the arena, Adam suddenly coughed up blood, even though he had dodged all of Zeus's attacks. According to Brunhilde, the old god had been expending massive amounts of energy to throw consecutive lethal blows, and Adam had overused divine reflection to copy them all, causing his body to overload. As a result, Adam's nervous system was suffering catastrophic damage. Brunhilde never expected Zeus to use this battle of attrition to counter Adam's copying power. However, Zeus was also at the threshold of his power limit, with his own muscles gradually tearing apart. According to Loki, the battle had now become a simple game of comparison. He poured wine into 2 glasses, stating that whoever's vessel overflowed first would lose, meaning whoever could endure until the very end would emerge victorious. Facing every lethal blow that Zeus unleashed, Adam responded in kind. He maintained a steadfast stance, continuously using divine reflection to counter the god's attacks. Neither opponent yielded an inch, as their very lives depended on these fatal strikes. The battle had become so breathtakingly spectacular that spectators from both sides stood up to get a clearer view. Even the god of war, Ares, was forced to his feet, as it was his first time witnessing such a fight. Only Brunhilde remained deeply anxious about Adam's condition, unsure if he could hold out against a great deity like Zeus. Up in the stands, Adam's entire family prayed fervently for him. However, while the whole Valhalla arena was roaring in a frenzy, a tragedy was about to strike Adam. Having overused divine reflection, his brain could no longer withstand the immense strain, and his eyes went completely blind. Seizing this opportunity, Zeus delivered a devastating punch to Adam's face, forcing him backward. The tide of the battle had turned. Zeus attacked relentlessly while Adam had to curl up defensively. Adam's metaphorical glass had overflowed first, leading Loki to conclude that his defeat was imminent. Believing the battle was lost, Eve and their children pleaded with him to stop. The entire human faction stood up, begging their forefather to cease fighting since the outcome seemed clear. Yet, just as humanity fell into despair, Adam heard the sound of a crying child in the stands. In his heart, he urged the child not to cry, swearing that their father would stand there to protect them all. Immediately after, Adam took the full brunt of Zeus's punch, but he instantly reached out and grabbed the god by his hair. Thus, the two fighters held onto each other while continuously raining a barrage of punches into their opponent's face. Everyone in the stands watched intently to see who would emerge victorious. When the storm of punches finally ceased, it was Zeus who collapsed first. The god's compressed muscles vaporized, leaving him looking like a withered husk. The entire human faction erupted in cheers, believing their progenitor had won. However, shortly after, Eve and the others realized in horror that Adam had already died on his feet at some point during the exchange. Zeus felt a deep sense of admiration for such an extraordinary human, admitting that if it had been a contest of endurance, he would have lost to Adam. Soon after, Adam's soul, along with his Valkyrie weapon, shattered into fragments and faded away. The victor of the second Ragnarok match was Zeus. Even though humanity was now moving closer to the brink of extinction, they held their heads high, immensely proud that their forefather had fought so valiantly to protect his descendants. After the battle, Gel was highly perplexed. Adam's knuckle-duster weapon was visibly intact, yet her sister Reginleif still had to sacrifice her life. Another Valkyrie named Hrist explained that when the two fought together, their bodies merged into one to unleash their ultimate techniques. Therefore, if they lost the match, both would share the exact same fate and vanish together. Although Hrist usually had a gentle personality, she suddenly became incredibly aggressive, demanding to slaughter all the gods to vent her anger. As Gull knew, Hrist possessed two opposing powers within her body, so when her power manifested, her temperament would shift erratically in this manner. Meanwhile, Brunhilde was furiously devouring pies, visibly enraged that humanity had lost 2 consecutive matches. She was determined to win the next round at any cost. However, when a message arrived on her phone, Brunhilde was so startled that she flipped over all her dishes. The god's next representative was the god of the sea, Poseidon. He was the older brother of Zeus, an incredibly powerful and ruthless deity. Gull became highly anxious, noting that the gods were sending out absolute powerhouses even though it was only the early stages of the tournament. Brunhilde told Gull to be quiet so she could calmly select humanity's next representative. After reviewing the candidates, Brunhilde felt a sense of despair, unsure of whom to choose. Just then, an old man walked up behind her, declaring that he would step into the arena for the next match. That man was Sasaki Kojiro, the greatest swordsman in Japanese history. Seeing Kojiro, everyone shared the same question. While the other warriors were summoned in their youthful prime, Kojiro appeared as an elderly man. However, Kojiro instantly demonstrated his swordsmanship by catching a bottle of milk that Brunhilde had just dropped, then happily drank it all. He explained that although he had died 400 years ago, he had never stopped practicing his sword skills in the afterlife. Therefore, his current state was actually the absolute peak of his strength. Witnessing Kojiro's confident demeanor, Brunhilde became delighted. The arena had now been transformed into an area surrounded by seawater. Heimdall reappeared to announce that the third match of Ragnarok was about to commence. Following his announcement, the arena gates opened, allowing water to flood inside. Yet, Poseidon merely stomped his foot, and the water automatically parted to create a path for him. The sea god slowly walked toward the stage amidst the thunderous cheers of the divine audience. He was known as the Tyrant of the Ocean, the Zeus of the seas. With his unmatched power, no deity dared to provoke him. Upon reaching the platform, Poseidon casually insulted the other gods, calling them filthy bottom feeders, and out of fear, none of them dared to speak up. Soon after, Heimdall introduced Poseidon's opponent for this match, a human who never stopped training to elevate his strength even after death, the greatest loser in history, Sasaki Kojiro. When humanity laid eyes on Kojiro, they lost all hope, seeing an old man standing against the youthful and formidable Poseidon. Cheering for Kojiro were the swordsmen he had previously fought, along with his lifelong rival, Musashi Miyamoto. Although the human spectators looked down on Kojiro, Brunhilde firmly believed his swordsmanship would secure their victory. Hearing the crowd's noisy murmurs, Kojiro lightly tapped his sword against the ground, instantly silencing the audience and bringing the flowing seawater to a complete halt. The gods immediately changed their perspective on the old man's strength. Musashi even destroyed his own clan's secret sword manuals, realizing he was no longer worthy to be called Kojiro's rival. Everyone understood that Kojiro had reached the absolute pinnacle of swordsmanship, a peerless blade master ready to slay the god of the sea in the upcoming fight. As Heimdall officially signaled the start of the match, the atmosphere in the arena grew intensely heavy. The two opponents stood perfectly still, merely staring at one another. Neither wanted to strike first, as both preferred a counter-attacking stance to avoid exposing any openings. Kojiro used his ultimate analytical mind to simulate various ways of attacking Poseidon. However, his mental simulation showed that the moment he dashed in, Poseidon would instantly pierce his chest, killing him on the spot. Kojiro calculated up to 18 different offensive maneuvers, but every single one resulted in his death at Poseidon's hands. Consequently, Kojiro began to sweat profusely, realizing the sea god was an overwhelmingly powerful opponent. Seeing this, Gull concluded that Poseidon must be the strongest among the 12 Olympians. However, Brunhilde shared a piece of divine history with Gull. Much like the 13 Valkyries, Mount Olympus originally had 13 gods, but one deity, Adamas, perished at the hands of Poseidon. Adamas was the older brother of both Zeus and Poseidon. Following their triumph over the giant Titans, Zeus was crowned the most powerful god in the cosmos. This made Adamas extremely jealous, as Zeus was the youngest of the brothers. Driven by envy, Adamas freed many of the imprisoned Titans and forced heaven's strongest monster, Typhon, to bend to his will. He even rallied numerous other gods to join his rebellion with the aim of overthrowing Zeus. Only Poseidon remained utterly contemptuous of Adamas, calling his older brother a pathetic fool. According to Poseidon, gods were born perfect. Thus, Adamas disgraced their very nature by conspiring against his fellow deities. Enraged by these words, Adamas drew his scythe to fight Poseidon. Even though Poseidon was his younger brother, he had never once looked Adamas in the face. Therefore, Adamas demanded that Poseidon look him straight in the eyes and acknowledge him as a true older brother. Poseidon finally looked up, but it would be the last time. Immediately after, Poseidon pierced Adamas through the torso, ending his life instantly. Since that day, divine history was rewritten to state that there had only ever been 12 gods on Mount Olympus. Ares, who had also heard this story from Hermes, was astounded, unable to believe that Adamas was annihilated with a single strike. But Hermes noted that this wasn't what made Poseidon truly terrifying. It was the fact that Poseidon treated Adamas as if he had never existed in the first place. The other gods knew better than to disobey the sea god, solidifying Poseidon as the god of gods. Down in the arena, Kojiro continued to simulate countless ways to attack Poseidon, but all ended in failure. The sea god stood entirely emotionless, not even sparing a single glance at the mortal. Knowing that attacking in any way would lead to his demise, Kojiro simply sat down on the ground to rest his legs. Throughout his entire life, Kojiro had never won a single duel. Since childhood, he was just a lazy boy who loved to play around. Kojiro was always late to the dojo, which frustrated everyone immensely. However, his swordsmanship was far from ordinary. He could easily defeat his massive senior, Kagekatsu, but Kojiro was a young man who liked to hide his true skills and had no desire to show off. Therefore, he intentionally lost to Kagekatsu and begged for forgiveness for being late. When questioned by the dojo master, Kojiro always claimed that he knew he couldn't win, so there was no point in tiring himself out with a real fight. Hearing this, the others concluded that Kojiro had no natural talent for swordsmanship and suggested he would be better off becoming a merchant. However, their assessment of Kojiro was entirely wrong, as he had been teaching himself by observing the natural world rather than relying on the dojo. During this time, Kojiro continuously learned how to move by studying agile animals like rabbits. Realizing his body was somewhat scrawny, he told himself to eat more meat to build muscle. At night, Kojiro would go out to observe the combat tactics of wild beasts. This was his unique method of self-study and training. After every defeat, he extracted valuable lessons to ensure a potential victory in the future. Kojiro returned to the dojo after 6 months of rigorous training deep in the forest. Seeing his newly muscular physique, everyone was in awe. Kagekatsu, in particular, challenged Kojiro to a duel to see if his skills had improved. However, Kojiro declined because he didn't want to seriously injure him right there. Assuming Kojiro was looking down on him, Kagekatsu grew furious. But as he approached Kojiro, he instinctively felt that he could be sliced in half at any moment. Therefore, he immediately dropped to his knees and conceded defeat. After his grueling training, Kojiro deeply desired a match with his master, Saigen. Standing before this ferocious warrior, Kojiro showed great excitement. No one knew the outcome of that duel, but from then on, Kojiro retreated back into the forest. Several years later, his master visited Kojiro, even though his eyesight had failed him. Upon entering the cabin, the master could sense the intensity of Kojiro's training over the years. Every pillar and surface in the house was covered in deep wooden sword strikes. All the strongest swordsmen at the dojo were no longer a match for Kojiro. The master even found a massive sword mark in the corner of the room, alongside a piece of paper bearing his name, proving that Kojiro had truly surpassed his teacher. The master offered Kojiro a chance to become a lord and govern the land, but Kojiro preferred to travel the world in search of stronger opponents. From then on, Kojiro lost countless times, but with every defeat, he learned a new lesson and gained invaluable combat experience. By this point, Kojiro was like a beast dying of thirst, endlessly yearning to meet and fight powerful individuals. After a long period of wandering, Kojiro mastered many ultimate techniques. He could easily slice a bird in half mid-flight, even from a great distance. Not long after, Kojiro's name was etched into history as the greatest loser, yet the most phenomenal swordsman to ever live. Returning to the arena, after sitting idly for a while, Kojiro noticed that Poseidon still had no intention of attacking. Left with no other choice, Kojiro was forced to stand up and make the first move. Normally, Kojiro might have surrendered to save his life, but this time, he could not run away. Up in the stands were his former masters and the rivals he had fought. Running now would be a profound insult to them all. Thus, Kojiro raised his 1-meter-long sword and charged straight at the god of the sea. He swung his blade with all his might, but Poseidon simply sidestepped to dodge it. Because the sword was both long and heavy, the momentum threw Kojiro off balance. Seizing this opening, Poseidon prepared to counterattack with his trident. However, Kojiro utilized his muscular strength and the swallow reversal technique to swiftly bring his blade back up. This move mimicked the flight of a swallow at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, unexpectedly slicing off a few strands of the sea god's hair. After this exchange, Poseidon was finally forced to glance at the mortal before him. Up in the stands, Musashi instantly recalled that this very technique had nearly taken his eye when they were young. The human faction was now brimming with hope, witnessing Kojiro's masterful swordsmanship. Furthermore, his 1-meter-long blade was formed from the Valkyrie Christ, the second oldest of the 13 demigod sisters. Seeing his haircut, Poseidon appeared quite irritated. He coldly stepped forward, his face exuding immense bloodlust. Poseidon then assumed an offensive stance, took a deep breath, and unleashed a flurry of invisible thrusts. However, Kojiro agilely weaved and dodged every single one. This proved that while Kojiro did not possess raw speed like Adam, his decades of combat experience, continuous defeats against great warriors, and his mental simulation abilities allowed him to perfectly predict Poseidon's movements. After simulating the fight over 1,000 times, Kojiro could see right through the sea god's footwork. If Adam was the fastest counterattacker, Kojiro was the fastest reader of movements. No matter how Poseidon attacked, Kojiro anticipated it and easily evaded. Witnessing Kojiro's performance, Ares could hardly believe his eyes, wondering when humanity had reached such a realm of mastery. Down in the arena, the sea god unexpectedly whistled, preparing for his next assault. He gripped his trident and lunged forward with supernatural speed far beyond Kojiro's expectations. Unable to react in time, Kojiro suffered a glancing thrust to his abdomen. The attack caused him to lose a significant amount of blood, bringing him to his knees. The sea god finally spoke his first words to a mortal, mocking Kojiro as a loser. Kojiro was in noticeable pain from the trident strike, but he still managed to stand up to defend against the incoming attacks. In the stands, the divine spectators boasted loudly that Poseidon was supreme, with his female fans swooning over him. This greatly annoyed Poseidon, prompting him to shoot them a deadly glare. Terrified, the crowd immediately fell silent, not daring to make another sound. Kojiro found this reaction puzzling, noting that Poseidon was rejecting the support of his peers. The sea god replied that deities do not need to rely on anyone, nor do they need friends. Gods, by nature, are born absolutely perfect. Hearing this, Kojiro expressed profound disappointment, calling the god's existence pitiful. Provoked by these words, Poseidon became enraged and instantly raised his weapon to attack Kojiro. He unleashed a relentless barrage of thrusts that left Kojiro struggling to defend himself. Coupled with his divine lightning of the sea technique, the assault felt as if it would tear the entire arena apart. It seemed Kojiro's taunt had truly angered Poseidon, making him want to end the match right then and there. According to Hermes, what Kojiro was seeing was merely the surface of Poseidon's power. The sea god harbored immense, unparalleled strength that even other deities had not fully witnessed, let alone a mere human with only a few decades of training. But what they didn't know was that the longer Kojiro fought, the more he evolved and adapted. His power had reached the realm of peerless defense, meaning he was bordering on the divine. However, his opponent was Poseidon, the god who stood above all other gods. After blocking the sea god's attacks for a while, Kojiro attempted to counterattack. But Poseidon easily dodged the slash, instantly circling behind Kojiro to strike his blind spot with the trident. Although Kojiro reacted in time, the force of the blow forced him back onto the defensive. At this moment, Kojiro realized the vast gap in strength between him and the sea god. It felt as though he were sinking deep into the ocean's abyss. Nevertheless, Kojiro kept trying to breach the surface, determined to land a hit on the sea god at any cost. Kojiro continuously dodged the trident to close the distance and delivered a sweeping slash. As Poseidon stepped back to evade, Kojiro switched his grip to launch another attack. But with extreme speed, the sea god maneuvered behind Kojiro and swung his trident, shattering Kojiro's Valkyrie sword perfectly in half. Seeing this, Gel screamed out, thinking her sister Christ had died, while the god Ares assumed Kojiro was doomed, since he no longer possessed a divine weapon. As all of humanity fell into despair, Kojiro showed no signs of fear. He gazed at his broken sword and reminisced about his past with his lifelong rival, Musashi. The two of them had once fought a very prolonged battle on an island. Facing a powerful opponent like Musashi, Kojiro often thought about surrendering to save his life. However, because the thrill of the fight was too intoxicating to resist, Kojiro continued to grip his sword and battle on. Musashi also felt his opponent's intense spirit, so he unleashed his full power and fought with everything he had. Although the duel only lasted a few more minutes, both men felt profoundly satisfied. Kojiro managed to carve another scar onto Musashi's face, while Musashi charged forward, using his dual swords to end Kojiro's life. In his final moments, Kojiro still wished he could have held his sword to fight a little longer. But instead of fighting Musashi, Kojiro was now facing a completely different opponent, one many times stronger than him. Holding his broken blade, Kojiro turned back to retrieve the other half of the sword. At the same time, he asked the sea god if he had ever undergone agonizing training, or if he had ever shed tears of gratitude toward an opponent. Kojiro then concluded that Poseidon would never experience such moments. As a deity born with absolute power, he never had any reason to train bitterly. In Kojiro's hands now was a sword, carrying the will of all his comrades. Therefore, Kojiro would not allow himself to be defeated here. Suddenly, the broken sword began to glow, leaving everyone in absolute awe. From that radiant light, Christ emerged to help Kojiro reforge a complete divine weapon. When the light faded, Kojiro was holding dual swords named Niten Ganryu. Gull was overjoyed that her sister Christ had survived. Brunhilde explained that because Christ possessed two distinct powers, one gentle and one volatile, when the sword broke, these two powers split into two separate blades. Hearing this, Gull praised Brunhilde as a highly clever person for knowing exactly which Valkyrie to pair with Kojiro. In truth, Brunhilde had just gotten incredibly lucky, causing her to scream wildly in excitement. Down in the arena, the two combatants resumed their battle. Both took a deep breath before charging at each other, unleashing incredibly lethal strikes. Kojiro used Musashi's dual sword stance to block the sea god's trident. Paired with this were all the techniques Kojiro had learned from the opponents and masters who had previously defeated him. They had become souls residing within Kojiro, enabling him to land his very first slashes on Poseidon's body. The sea god was now covered in numerous wounds, forcing the divine audience into silence, while the human spectators began to cheer for Kojiro as he had brought them a beacon of hope. Kojiro himself stood before a massive opportunity to become humanity's first god-slayer. However, the sea god maintained his focused demeanor despite the roaring crowd. He used his own blood to slick back his hair, amplifying his intimidating aura. It seemed that after taking Kojiro's strikes, Poseidon was finally going to fight seriously. He gripped his trident and unleashed a thrust that caused Kojiro's shoulder to bleed. Sensing Poseidon's killing intent, Kojiro had to step back to maintain his distance. This time, however, the sea god abandoned all unnecessary movements and attacked Kojiro head-on. Even though Kojiro could see the attack coming, it was simply too fast to evade completely. After stabbing Kojiro multiple times, Poseidon shifted his offensive stance. He moved at terrifying speeds, relentlessly attacking Kojiro in a dome-like formation. Inside this dome, Kojiro struggled immensely to fend off direct thrusts coming from every conceivable direction. At this moment, Kojiro felt as if he had hit the absolute bottom of his hope. He realized that the gap in power between him and the divine was simply too vast to ever bridge. Kojiro's life had always been tied to the title of a loser, so losing one more match wouldn't matter. However, the bonds and camaraderie burning within Kojiro refused to let him despair. From the stands, the swordsman chanted Kojiro's name to fuel his willpower, knowing he still had much more strength left to display. Kojiro abandoned all thoughts of giving up, resolving to claim the first victory of his entire life. Although his body was bleeding profusely, he was determined to find a decisive opening to turn the tide. The moment the sea god thrust forward, Kojiro immediately used his swords to parry the trident. As humanity's blade reached the bottom of the ocean, Kojiro awakened his ultimate combat simulation ability. He was able to read every single offensive movement of the sea god flawlessly. Kojiro then dodged the thrusts while charging straight at the sea god. Up in the stands, the gods could no longer believe their eyes. As Kojiro closed the distance, everyone knew this was the deciding moment. Using the technique Thousand Blades, Kojiro instantly severed Poseidon's right arm along with the trident. When the sea god used his other hand to catch the falling trident and attack, Kojiro seamlessly sliced off his remaining arm. At this point, all the gods understood what was about to happen to Poseidon. Having no arms left, the sea god used his mouth to bite down on the trident, but Kojiro immediately used his dual swords to execute two fatal cross slashes across Poseidon's torso. The sea god only had time to utter the word loser before his body was sliced into pieces. The entire human faction, along with Brunhilde, rejoiced with boundless joy, as this was their very first victory. For Kojiro, this was also the first victory in his entire life as a swordsman. Heimdall then announced that the winner of the third match of Ragnarok was Sasaki Kojiro, and the technique he used to finish the sea god was called the Swallow-Tiger Combo, Thousand Blades. The divine faction still couldn't fathom that their supreme god had just been defeated, watching in horror as the sea god's soul crumbled into dust before their eyes. Following his victory, Kojiro turned back to thank all his comrades and rivals who had come to support him. For Brunhilde, she hoped this victory would serve as a wake-up call to the gods, proving they could no longer look down on humanity. On the gods' side, Odin was furious, while Loki could no longer treat Ragnarok as a joke, realizing that a god could actually lose their life to a mortal human. By now, the path home appeared before Kojiro, but he had no strength left. Thus, the Valkyrie Christ manifested to help him stand back up. She looked toward Gol and Brunhilde, affirming their shared vow to win. Though Gol was thrilled, Brunhilde remained solemn. This was merely their first victory, and they still needed to secure 6 more wins. Despite taking a severe beating earlier, Zeus still received the other gods in his quarters. Shiva was incredibly frustrated that Poseidon had just lost, yet Zeus showed no emotion. Zeus had to admit that Kojiro was simply too strong, which led to the sea god's defeat. He also reiterated the purpose of Ragnarok, to prove whether humans truly possessed power comparable to the gods. Furthermore, Brunhilde was actively determined to defeat the divine, meaning they all had to fight with utmost seriousness. Hearing this, Shiva was eager to fight in the next match. However, the Greek gods were bitter, considering this a personal vendetta for their pantheon. Since Shiva was an Indian god, he was forced to yield the next match to another deity. Before the next match began, Brunhilde whispered something to Hermes. When Gol ran over to ask, she refused to reveal what they had just discussed. Soon after, Heimdall arrived to announce that the 4th match of Ragnarok was about to start. The arena was restructured and transformed into a replica of 19th century London. It turned out that the human representative had requested the next battle take place in this setting, and the divine representative had generously accepted the terms. The divine audience was baffled as to which god would be so accommodating, nor did they know who the human fighter was to demand such a street-style arena. From the shadows, humanity's 4th representative officially stepped forth. He was an incredibly wicked man who had plunged the entire city of London into absolute terror, the most notorious serial killer in human history, Jack the Ripper, the culprit behind unsolved mysterious murders. Hearing this, the entire human audience was horrified, unable to comprehend why a murderer like him was chosen as their next representative. Loki knew full well that Brunhilde was resorting to any means necessary to secure a victory. However, the next fighter representing the gods was no ordinary figure either. He was the heroic god Hercules, a valiant warrior who had single-handedly subdued the Nemean lion and the 3-headed hound Cerberus. After successfully completing his 12 labors, Hercules had ascended to become a demigod. Thus, Hercules stood as the absolute symbol of justice, while Jack the Ripper represented pure evil. When justice and pure evil clash, who will emerge victorious in the next battle? Before the match began, Brunhilde thought that after their recent defeat, the divine faction would undoubtedly send an incredibly powerful representative for the next round. As soon as she finished the thought, Hercules appeared before them and announced that he would be the god's next representative. Upon seeing Hercules, Gul was overjoyed, as it had been a very long time since they last met. She showed great respect, considering him her superior. However, when she learned that Hercules was the next divine representative, her expression changed drastically, as he was now the one standing in their way. Brunhilde could only wish him luck in the upcoming battle. While Hercules was preparing for the match, Loki appeared. The god of mischief mocked him, calling him a half-breed demigod, which was why he was so close to the Valkyries. However, Hercules replied that as a representative of the divine, he would fight with all his might. Hercules himself opposed the annihilation of humanity. Nevertheless, once participating in Ragnarok, he swore never to lose and to bring home the victory. Hearing this, Loki wondered whose side Hercules was actually on. Hercules responded that he was not on any particular side, but only stood for justice. Gel was also conflicted about who to cheer for in the next match, while Brunhilde laughed loudly, having chosen an opponent perfectly matched for Hercules. It was the most despicable human scum she utterly despised, a piece of trash that once existed in the mortal realm known as Jack the Ripper. At this point, Gul was speechless, never expecting her sister to choose a murderer for this match. Hercules was equally furious that his opponent was a scumbag like Jack, especially when previous human representatives like Lu Bu, Adam, and Kojiro were all worthy warriors. Therefore, Hercules roared in anger at Brunhilde for forcing him to fight such a man. Meanwhile, the human faction was also unsure who to support, as Jack was a disgrace to them all. Still, some people did not know who Jack was, So the detective Sherlock Holmes informed them that he was the one serial killer he could never catch in his entire life. Before the match started, Hercules made a proposition, asking Jack to bow his head and surrender. If he did so, Hercules promised to persuade Zeus to guarantee the safety of his soul. However, Jack thanked Hercules for his concern, stating that, as a gentleman who had just received a duel request, he would never decline. When Jack drew his weapons, many thought they were dual swords like Kojiro's, but they were actually the two halves of a giant pair of scissors transformed from a Valkyrie. Everyone agreed that this was the most fitting weapon for a killer like him. Jack himself was highly satisfied to wield a divine weapon for the first time, one that could cut through anything, much like how he butchered his victims. Seeing this, Hercules promised to use all his strength to destroy him. Yet, upon hearing that, Jack immediately turned around and ran away, leaving Hercules completely baffled. Soon after, Hercules chased him into an alleyway, where a scent wafted toward him. He found Jack casually sitting and drinking tea, ignoring the tension of the battle. Jack invited Hercules to join him for a cup, but naturally, the god refused, solely intent on fighting. As Hercules gripped his club and approached Jack, he suddenly noticed a very thin wire in front of him. The moment Hercules snapped the wire, a barrage of throwing knives fell upon him, but they could do nothing against his durable body. Hercules informed Jack that ordinary human weapons had no effect on the divine. However, Jack never took anyone's word for it, insisting on testing it himself. Hercules then stepped forward, intending to finish Jack right away to end his games, but Jack used his grappling gun to shoot a hook and swing upward, maintaining his distance from Hercules. In response, Hercules leaped powerfully into the air to reach him. With his club in hand, Hercules delivered a devastating strike that instantly shattered Jack's Valkyrie scissors. The human audience assumed Jack would perish now that he was without his divine weapon. But Jack merely hopped onto a wall corner, showing no fear whatsoever. He then pulled a handful of throwing knives from his pouch and hurled them directly at Hercules. The gods still believed these were ordinary weapons, but to his surprise, the blades pierced right through his flesh. Hercules was heavily wounded and could not understand why, so Jack revealed that the scissors were never his divine weapon. He had lied earlier. In fact, Jack's pouch was the true divine weapon capable of harming Hercules. However, this pouch could only produce small weapons like knives, making it perfectly suited for a gentlemanly serial killer like Jack. The divine spectators grew anxious, while humanity began to foster hope for another victory. Gull still didn't understand why Brunhilde had chosen such a killer, but Brunhilde stated that Jack's profound malice was exactly the kind of weapon needed to counter a completely righteous god like Hercules. At this moment, Jack was feeling immensely ecstatic seeing Hercules wounded, even mockingly praying to the gods that his divine opponent might survive this battle. Hercules grew highly infuriated because Jack relied entirely on dirty tricks. When the serial killer hurled his weapons, the god used his club to deflect all the throwing knives. Seeing this, Jack continuously altered his throwing trajectories, managing to inflict multiple wounds across Hercules' body. However, the god continued to march straight forward, gradually closing the distance between them. After shattering the barrage of blades, Hercules raised his club high, preparing to strike Jack down right on the spot. Yet, Jack swiftly pulled out the two halves of an umbrella from his coat and pieced them together. He then spun the umbrella rapidly, causing Hercules' heavy club strike to deflect and miss. Following this exchange, Hercules realized that Jack was no coward, but the killer continued to toy with him playfully, forcing the god to unleash a new level of power. Tattoos gradually began to spread across Hercules' body, while his club transformed to take on the visage of the Nemean lion, one of his legendary 12 labors. As the club swung down, it unleashed the ferocious power of the lion, forcing Jack to step back. Jack attempted to raise his umbrella to block the attack, but Hercules' overwhelming strength instantly shattered the umbrella, sending the killer flying straight into the wall. That was a lethal move from Hercules, leading many to think Jack was dead. However, he slowly stood back up and gently popped his dislocated joints back into place. Jack held a philosophy that if one knows how to enjoy pain, it will heal itself. The previous attacks were merely a prelude to the evening. He then pulled out a massive knife from his coat to prepare for the second act of their battle. By this time, the tattoos on Hercules' body were spreading to numerous areas. According to Ares, Hercules had achieved 12 labors and mastered 12 divine techniques, but using any of these techniques came with a price. Wherever the tattoos spread on Hercules' body, he would suffer excruciating pain. Yet, Loki was quite surprised that Hercules' expression didn't change at all, wondering just how much the god could endure. Ares explained that if the tattoos spread across his entire body, Hercules would die, and his soul would completely dissipate. Nevertheless, Ares maintained absolute faith that Hercules would win, because his true strength wasn't just his magnificent physique, but his unbreakable, iron-willed fighting spirit. Since childhood, Hercules was someone who always stood for justice. Thus, when his friend was being beaten, Hercules did not hesitate to rush in and fight the two bullies to take back his friend's calf. Although both of them ended up severely beaten, Hercules was very happy to have done a good deed. In his youth, Hercules' body was quite scrawny and weaker than the others, but whether it was fighting or hunting beasts, he was always on the front lines. Hercules' sole purpose was to protect the weak and stand on the side of justice. That evening, the villagers brought back a massive wild boar, but Hercules felt he hadn't contributed anything and therefore had no right to eat. At that moment, the two bullies from earlier approached to mock him, pointing out that Hercules was always training but never actually getting stronger. They then challenged him to drink the water in the temple of Zeus. Legend had it that this water was the blood of Zeus, and anyone worthy of being a hero who drank it would become immortal. But if they were not a true hero, they would die instantly. They insulted Hercules, calling him a failure, and claimed he would definitely perish if he drank it. Hercules, who always craved strength so he could protect justice, consistently chose the most difficult and thorny paths to grow stronger. Through relentless effort to temper himself, eventually no one dared to mock him as weak anymore. Around that time, the gods had gathered to decide the fate of humanity. Although the majority insisted on letting humanity exist for another 1,000 years, the goddess Aphrodite wanted to teach humanity a lesson because they were constantly starting wars and driving many animal species to extinction. After their discussion, the god of war, Ares, took on the responsibility of punishing humans. Soon after, he led numerous divine soldiers down to the mortal realm to judge the sins of the people. Unable to fight against the divine, humanity could only pray in helplessness, except for Hercules, who stepped forward to protect everyone. He gripped his club and charged forward, but was instantly kicked into a wall by Ares. Despite this, Hercules used his meager strength to hold back the god of war. Seeing this, Ares grew interested in Hercules and promised to spare his life if he surrendered to the divine. However, Hercules saw that the gods had created humans and were arbitrarily deciding their fate. Even though humans constantly prayed to them, the gods now wanted to punish them, which Hercules believed was not true justice. Therefore, he decided to gamble his life to stop them. He drank the blood of Zeus to amplify his strength. Upon drinking it, Hercules roared as his body felt like it was consumed by fire. Ares dismissed Hercules as a foolish mortal who didn't know his place, but right after, Hercules awakened, leaving Ares utterly shocked. He couldn't believe Hercules now possessed the strength of his father Zeus. With just a few basic moves, Hercules defeated all the divine soldiers accompanying Ares. It was just Hercules and Ares left fighting hand to hand until the very last minute, continuously charging at each other to deliver devastating blows. Right at that moment, Zeus appeared to stop them. Knowing that Hercules had just consumed his blood, Zeus offered to make him a full-fledged god. Hercules agreed, but on one condition: Zeus had to swear never to harm humanity from then on. Zeus agreed to the terms, but reminded Hercules that he must guide humanity along his path of justice. From then on, Hercules officially became a god, bidding farewell to his best friend to embark on his divine duties. For 4,000 years, the gods did not interfere in the affairs of the mortal realm, while Hercules stood among the ranks of the gods as a son of Zeus. And that was the story Ares recounted to the other deities. Meanwhile, down in the arena, Hercules was fighting an evenly matched battle against Jack the Ripper. At this moment, Jack had combined his weapons to form a boomerang and continuously hurled throwing knives at Hercules, forcing the god to struggle defensively. Not wanting to let Jack maintain his attacking distance, Hercules endured the pain and charged straight forward. However, Jack unexpectedly leaped into the air to dodge Hercules' attack. It turned out that Jack had strung piano wires across the battlefield while they were fighting. He had thrown his knives so they would ricochet off the piano wires and rain down directly upon Hercules. Jack then manipulated these wires to create a downpour of blades, leaving Hercules with no choice but to stand still and endure the barrage. Ares was extremely worried that Hercules would lose his life to these attacks. Meanwhile, Hercules' human friends in the stands stood by him instead of cheering for humanity. Right then, Hercules repelled the daggers and unleashed his sixth labor, transforming his club into an eagle that blew the flying knives back toward Jack. With only his cloak, Jack could not defend himself and fell back down. Unintentionally, a stray knife destroyed Jack's monocle, revealing his right eye, which glowed a rather terrifying crimson. With this eye, Jack could see that Hercules' body radiated a golden color, representing an incredibly unwavering will. At this moment, Jack desperately wanted to kill Hercules just to see what color the god would turn after his death. Because Jack was an absolute psychopath, Hercules couldn't understand a word he was saying. Even worse, Jack then began to sing "London Bridge is Falling Down" as a requiem for Hercules. Returning to the past, Jack was once just a poor boy begging on the streets of London. Although he only scavenged for leftover food in garbage bins, Jack was still beaten by a cruel cook. With his red eye, Jack could read the emotional colors within people. He knew this man was arrogant, so Jack begged for forgiveness and promised never to return. Holding the scraps of food in his hands, he thought his mother would be very happy that he had found them. Jack's mother, Mary, was a sex worker in a brothel. She seemed to love and spoil Jack deeply, so when she saw his wounds, Mary appeared extremely worried. With the little money she had just earned, Mary decided to use it to buy medicine for her son. Mary always said that Jack was her final hope. Using his emotion-seeing eye, Jack saw that his mother possessed the most beautiful emotional color in the world. Whenever he wasn't out begging, Jack would read books to educate himself. At that time, another woman named Anne seemed very jealous of Jack's mother because, despite her age, Mary was still highly favored by the patrons, while Anne received no attention. In truth, Mary had been impregnated by clients 5 times and had aborted all of them, but when it came to Jack, she kept the boy and raised him until he was 12. Anne always considered Jack a pitiful child for having to grow up at the absolute bottom of society. However, Jack always wore a bright smile because he truly believed he was the happiest person in the world. That was until one day, Jack returned home to find his mother in extreme agony. When Jack asked what happened, Anne explained that the man Mary deeply loved had just announced his marriage. This man was also Jack's father, and he had once promised that after achieving success, he would return to take Mary and her child away. Anne called Mary foolish for believing his lies. Following this event, Jack's mother completely suffered a mental breakdown. She no longer loved Jack as before, but instead showed deep resentment toward him. At this moment, Jack finally realized that his mother had only kept him because of the promise with his father. In the end, Jack was merely a tool to connect Mary to her lost love. Through his special eye, Jack saw that his mother's emotional color had now turned into the same ugly shade as the wicked people he had encountered before. Consequently, Jack lost his mind and decided he would use his own hands to free his mother. In that instant, Jack saw Mary's color shift to fear, and he deemed this the most beautiful color a human could possess. Immediately after, Jack stabbed Mary, taking her life, and did not forget to say, "I love you, mother," before she passed away. To give his mother someone to talk to in the afterlife, Jack then sought out his father. The man was terrified, thinking Jack was a crazed fanatic stalking him, but Jack coldly stated that he was there to grant him salvation. With a single slash, Jack sent his father to the afterlife to reunite with his mother, taking his father's top hat before disappearing into the darkness of London. From then on, whenever he committed a murder, Jack would hum the tune of "London Bridge is Falling Down." Returning to the present, Jack was deeply eager to see the color of Hercules' fear when facing death. However, Hercules declared that a brave man like him would never show fear. Immediately, Jack hurled numerous throwing knives at Hercules, but the god deflected and destroyed them all with his club. Jack was losing ground and was cornered near the Big Ben clock tower. The clock bell chimed, and Hercules declared that this was Jack's death knell. Jack quickly used his grappling gun to swing up the clock tower, but the hook slipped, forcing him to cling to the ledges and climb up desperately to survive. Down below, Hercules used his club to smash the foundation of the tower, causing it to tilt to one side. Fortunately, Jack managed to grab onto the clock's hands, preventing himself from falling. At this point, Hercules switched to his 7th labor, transforming the head of his club into a bull. Heimdall predicted that after this attack, Jack would certainly perish. However, Jack tore off the massive face of the Big Ben clock and hurled it straight at Hercules. Everyone assumed Jack was making a futile last stand, but to their sheer astonishment, the clock face cleanly sliced off Hercules' arm. Up in the stands, everyone stared in wide-eyed disbelief that such a mundane object could gravely injure Hercules. Only then did Hercules and the other gods realize that Jack's divine weapon was neither the giant scissors nor the pouch of knives, but the very gloves he wore, which possessed the miraculous ability to turn anything they touched into a divine weapon. From the very beginning, Jack had calculated every move and deceived Hercules solely to set up this fatal strike and sever his arm. Loki realized that Brunhilde had planned this from the start to secure such a formidable weapon for Jack. It turned out that, prior to the match, Brunhilde had knocked on the door of the Valkyrie Hluk, asking her to become Jack's divine weapon. Naturally, the young Valkyrie had no desire to become a weapon for a serial killer. Hluk knew that during combat, a Valkyrie had to become one with the warrior, and she absolutely refused to merge with a psychopath like Jack. But just then, Hluk sensed Jack's terrifying bloodlust behind her. Jack politely offered Hluk the chance to become his Valkyrie, and when she refused, he violently grabbed the young girl. Standing right there, Brunhilde did not intervene. This was the scenario she had orchestrated. Under Jack's coercion, the small girl was forcefully transformed into his divine gloves. Hearing this, Gull condemned Brunhilde for doing something so horrific to their sister, but Brunhilde stated that Hluk's power was perfectly suited for Jack and was an all-necessary sacrifice for humanity to win this crucial match. Now, Jack was ecstatic to possess such an overpowered divine weapon. Even a simple brick, once touched by Jack, could inflict damage equivalent to a weapon of mass destruction. In other words, every single corner of London had now become a divine weapon in his hands. The divine faction continuously cheered for Hercules, hoping he could turn the tide against the serial killer, but Jack merely considered their shouts as a requiem for the god. Ares was also terrified that Hercules might lose his life to Jack, but Zeus appeared and struck his hulking son to silence him, pointing out that Hercules clearly hadn't given up, and Ares was worrying unnecessarily. Zeus firmly believed that Hercules possessed immense power and would not be defeated so easily. At this moment, Hercules used the sash over his shoulder to tie off his severed arm and stop the bleeding, while still gripping his club with his remaining hand to fight Jack the Ripper. With his special eye, Jack could see the god's unwavering fighting spirit, prompting him to tip his hat in admiration of Hercules' indomitable will. Hercules was somewhat curious about Jack's emotion-seeing eye, and Jack proudly claimed it was a gift bestowed by the divine, helping him survive in this cruel world and allowing him to witness the myriad emotions of those he was about to murder. Hearing this, Hercules declared that Jack was nothing but a loser who had surrendered to this cruel world, turning into a bloodthirsty monster purely for the sake of revenge. Hercules added that he too was once human before ascending to godhood, and throughout his life, he had witnessed countless sins committed by humanity. Yet despite all of it, Hercules still loved humans and would never become a monster like Jack. Right here and now, he promised to deliver Jack from the suffering he endured. Immediately after, Hercules threw his club into the air, creating a spatial vortex from which he summoned the three-headed hound of the underworld to significantly boost his combat power. As it appeared, each of the hound's heads bit down on parts of Hercules' body. This was his 12th labor, transforming him and granting him the power of the Hound of Hades, Cerberus. Upon seeing this, Zeus noted that Hercules was now racing against time, as this technique would only stop once Jack the Ripper was completely annihilated. If not, Cerberus would completely consume Hercules' body, killing him. In other words, it was a lethal technique that devoured Hercules' own life force. Therefore, the moment he transformed, Hercules charged at Jack and unleashed a punch that obliterated an entire street corner. Jack used his gloves to turn the rubble into divine weapons and counterattacked. But no matter what Jack transformed, Hercules easily smashed it to pieces. In a split second, Jack skillfully dodged Hercules' punch and leaped behind him. When Hercules rushed in again, Jack kicked up a manhole cover and enhanced it to block the punch. However, before Hercules' raw power, even the reinforced manhole cover was shattered, resulting in Jack taking a heavy punch to the face. Ares felt regretful, noting that if it had been a direct hit, Jack would have been killed instantly. Sensing the extreme danger Hercules posed, Jack used his grappling hook again to create distance. However, Hercules leaped high into the air and punched Jack back down to the ground, causing his body to be impaled by an iron fence. Jack was forced to sever the iron bar and pull it out of his body in excruciating pain. Hercules advised Jack not to resist anymore, as there was nowhere left for him to run. But to Jack, all of London was a weapon. He used his enhanced cape to slice through the foundation of a nearby building. Jack then lunged forward, feigning an attack, only to use the rebound force from Hercules' arm to launch himself out of harm's way just as the building, now a massive divine weapon, collapsed directly onto the god. Although Hercules braced himself to bear the weight, he was still buried underneath the crushing debris. Jack's brilliant and utterly malicious calculation left everyone astounded, leading many to assume Hercules had perished from this devastating trap. Yet, Hercules burst forth from the rubble, telling Jack that no matter the attack, he would always stand back up with his indomitable spirit. At this moment, Jack saw that Hercules radiated an emotional color very similar to his mother's from long ago. Because his mother had betrayed him, Jack believed her color was fake, whereas the color Hercules possessed was a genuine, pure love for humanity. Driven to madness, Jack desperately wanted to dye Hercules in his favorite color, fear. Naturally, Hercules was unbothered, eagerly waiting to see what color Jack would try to paint him. Thus, the two slowly approached one another, with Jack conjuring two divine weapons for close-quarters combat. What followed was an incredibly evenly matched battle. Although Hercules had lost one arm, his remaining arm still held immense power, allowing him to smash through Jack's shield and strike the killer squarely in the abdomen, sending him flying quite a distance. Since Jack was heavily injured from the blow, Hercules charged in again to finish him off before his own body was fully consumed by Cerberus's power. Loki then noticed that Jack was plotting something, as the killer was only trying to dodge without attempting to gain distance from Hercules. In reality, Jack was preparing the perfect angle and timing to unleash his decisive strike. Once in range, Jack pulled out the iron fence post from earlier to attack Hercules' blind spot, but the god easily evaded and knocked Jack dozens of meters away. After this impact, Jack lay completely motionless on the ground. Seeing him stop moving, everyone assumed the match was over. While both gods and humans despised and looked down upon Jack, only Anne was there, cheering for the unfortunate boy. Shortly after, the entire arena fell silent as they heard Jack humming, "London Bridge is falling down." He slowly stood up to perform the requiem he so often sang. Once finished, Jack approached Hercules with a frail demeanor, raising his iron rod to attack, but Hercules delivered a direct punch to his face. Everyone thought the next blow would officially end Jack, but unexpectedly, the killer braced his legs and thrust both of his bare hands straight through Hercules' torso. Jack declared that this was his ultimate technique, a gift meant exclusively for a righteous god like Hercules. Only then did the god realize that Jack had used his own blood, smearing it onto his gloves to turn his bare hands into divine weapons for this final blow. Hercules acknowledged that despite being heavily injured, Jack was an incredibly formidable opponent. Jack, however, admitted defeat in his own way, stating that the color of Hercules' indomitable spirit had never wavered. In his final moments, Hercules opened his arms and embraced Jack, declaring that no matter what sins humanity committed, he would always love them. The gods could not accept that Hercules had sacrificed himself. As he faded, Hercules thanked Brunhilde for a spectacular match, passing on his will to her and asking her to do everything in her power to save humanity. The fourth match of Ragnarok thus ended with Jack the Ripper as the victor. However, deep inside, he harbored a myriad of emotions he could not put into words. The Valkyrie Hluk then manifested and asked Jack how he felt after slaying a god. Jack replied that throughout his life, he had murdered many people, but this was the first time he experienced such a strange feeling, one he had never felt before. Images of Hercules while he was alive kept flashing through his mind, a righteous, unyielding god who never went back on his word. Jack mused that if he were granted a single wish, he would want to meet Hercules one more time just to converse with him. Even though Jack brought victory for humanity, he was heavily condemned by the audience of both the divine and human factions, as both sides mourned for a god as incredibly compassionate as Hercules. Gull also felt deeply saddened and blamed Brunhilde for being too cruel in letting that murderer take Hercules' life. In truth, Brunhilde was also deeply sorrowful, but it was something she had to do to save humanity. Immediately afterward, Brunhilde returned to the memorial room for the warriors who had fallen in Ragnarok. There, she placed the portrait of Hercules, who had just sacrificed himself, alongside Lu Bu and Adam. After pouring wine to honor them, she apologized to Hercules and promised that once Ragnarok was over, she would go to meet him. Meanwhile, the divine faction was experiencing a mix of profound grief and anxiety because they had lost 2 matches in a row. Loki noted that the combat skills of a killer like Jack could not be underestimated, as he had flawlessly calculated every move to defeat a powerful god like Hercules. Furthermore, this devious Englishman had deceived everyone, causing them to underestimate his threat. Zeus, however, realized this was no time to argue, as the current score was tied at 2-2. Exerting his immense power, he destroyed their viewing balcony and ordered that the divine faction must absolutely not lose the next match. Loki, on the other hand, was eagerly anticipating who humanity's next representative would be. Meanwhile, a young Japanese swordsman named Okita Soji was very eager for his turn to fight, as this was the first time he had seen so many top-tier masters gathered together. Since it seemed the next match would not begin immediately, the gods took the opportunity to stroll around and relax. Loki, however, headed to the garden of the Valhalla arena to wait for an important figure. That person promptly appeared, sporting a highly stylish outfit with a lollipop perpetually in his mouth. It was Gautama Buddha, a warrior for the divine faction. Upon meeting, the two exchanged glares. Loki then voiced his suspicion, questioning how the Valkyries could possess enough power to destroy gods. He deduced that someone must be helping them, as the gods would never allow the Valkyries to run rampant on their own. Loki suddenly recalled that within Buddha's teachings, there was a method allowing 2 individuals to entrust their lives to one another and fight together. This was exactly how the Valkyries forged divine weapons and entrusted their lives to the human fighters. Hearing this, Buddha brushed it off, claiming he didn't understand a thing Loki was talking about because the trickster god was simply talking too much. So Loki cut straight to the chase, asking if Buddha had betrayed the gods. If so, Loki threatened to fight him right then and there. Just as tensions between the two rose, a group known as the 7 Lucky Gods arrived. They were heaven's executioners, constantly proclaiming that traitors would be punished by divine judgment. One of them stepped toward Buddha, threatening to judge his sins, which annoyed Buddha so much that he spat his lollipop directly into the god's hand. Seeing this, the 7 Lucky Gods drew their weapons, ready to execute Buddha on the spot. Initially, Loki claimed Buddha was his prey and forbade anyone from touching him, but he quickly sided with the 7 Lucky Gods to gang up on Buddha. Of course, Buddha feared no one, boldly telling them all to come at him at once, as he could take them all. Right at that moment, Sasaki Kojiro appeared, having just recovered from his injuries. Following his feat of slaying Poseidon, everyone had to look at him with newfound respect. Seeing Buddha being outnumbered, Kojiro offered to lend him a hand. Joining him were the young swordsman Okita Soji and his commander, who also arrived and sided with Buddha to fight the gods. Loki scoffed at Kojiro, noting he hadn't fully recovered yet. Okita, sensing that Loki was an evil deity, wanted to test his skills against him. However, the lucky god from earlier stopped Loki, claiming this was his personal vendetta. When the god fired his weapon, Buddha used his incredible speed to dodge to the side, casually mocking him for throwing a tantrum like a child. Realizing Buddha's immense power, Loki also summoned his weapons to launch a continuous barrage at him. But the one who intercepted Loki was Okita, whose target was the god of mischief himself. Irritated that his weapons were deflected by Okita, Loki threatened to obliterate the boy's soul. Yet, Okita was entirely unfazed and charged forward to fight Loki to the death. Right then, Zeus appeared, delivering a punch to break up this unnecessary brawl. Though Zeus didn't know what had happened, he refused to let the divine faction tear itself apart from the inside. The armed lucky god remained resentful of Buddha and refused to stand down. In response, Odin unleashed an overwhelming aura of power that forced everyone to stop. Losing his mood to fight, Loki bid Buddha farewell and left to watch the next match. One of the 7 lucky gods also reminded Buddha that traitors would eventually be eliminated. The human faction also withdrew, as there was nothing left for them to do there. Zeus then lightly warned Buddha not to cause any more trouble. But Buddha merely laughed heartily, bit his lollipop to pieces, and declared that throughout heaven and earth, no one could dictate what he did. In other words, he was the honored one, declaring throughout heaven and earth, I alone am the honored one. Zeus didn't particularly care, so he returned to the arena to continue watching the matches. Odin, however, felt as though he had just been insulted. In his anger, he flared his power, causing all the plants in the garden to wither and die. Meanwhile, Gull went to see Brunhilde to apologize for lashing out at her earlier. Brunhilde comforted her younger sister, telling her there was no need to apologize, as they now needed to cooperate and do everything they could to assist humanity. Immediately after, they went to a room to meet humanity's next fighter. After passing through numerous doors, they finally met this massive man. Upon seeing him, Gull was speechless, assuming he was merely a lazy, lecherous individual who did nothing but eat and sleep all day. In truth, this was humanity's greatest sumo wrestler, Raiden Tamimon. Brunhilde yelled loudly to wake Raiden and the women accompanying him. Slightly annoyed, Raiden made a pass at Brunhilde, but she told him this was no time for jokes, as he was up for the next match. Hearing this, he curiously asked if he would get to fuse with a Valkyrie. Not wanting to disappoint him, Brunhilde had chosen a very special girl for him, a Valkyrie with a massive, muscular physique, even larger than Raiden's, named Thrud. The moment Raiden saw Thrud, he rushed to hug her, declaring she was exactly his type. Thrud instantly melted into a feminine demeanor, leaving Gull dumbfounded that the most physically imposing Valkyrie could be won over by Raiden so effortlessly. Soon after, the two merged into one in preparation for the match. The arena had now been transformed into a traditional Japanese sumo ring. Heimdall appeared to announce that the fifth match of Ragnarok was about to begin. With the current score tied at 2-2, both factions desperately wanted to win this round. From the Eastern Gate, humanity's legendary sumo wrestler, Raiden, emerged, a man of towering stature with absolutely flawless muscles. Hearing the audience chant his name, Raiden was delighted to know that humanity still cherished the martial art of sumo in this era. From the Western Gate, the god's representative appeared, a deity who would casually create worlds for amusement and capriciously destroy them. This was the Indian god of destruction, Shiva. Finally, this god had the chance to showcase his power after waiting through so many matches. Zeus hoped Shiva would perform well to prevent the gods from suffering 3 consecutive losses. Down in the arena, Heimdall officially announced the start of the 5th match. Cheering for Shiva were his wives, along with his eldest son, who had the head of an elephant. As the cheering drums echoed, Shiva declared he would destroy Raiden in an instant. However, the god of destruction was left speechless when a giant frog appeared before him. He thought his opponent was going to gang up on him, but it turned out the frog merely brought Raiden a handful of salt. Raiden tossed the salt into the air and clapped his hands loudly, leading the god of destruction to realize this was a traditional sumo ritual. Immediately afterward, Raiden, brimming with fighting spirit, launched into battle. He propelled himself forward at blinding speed, drop-kicking Shiva squarely in the face with both feet. Although the god of destruction was pushed backward, he quickly regained his balance and stood right back up. Shiva felt the impact of the blow, noting that it had been well worth the wait to finally face a worthy opponent like Raiden. The moment he finished speaking, Raiden charged again, launching an uppercut from below, which Shiva managed to block. However, Raiden still had his other arm, landing a second punch that left Shiva slightly dazed. Raiden intended to use a knee strike to end the match, a move so brutal that the audience dared not watch. However, because Shiva possessed multiple arms, he managed to block Raiden's knee. Shiva then used 2 hands to restrain the wrestler and his other 2 hands to deliver straight punches directly to Raiden's chest. After this blow, Raiden clutched his chest, finding it difficult to breathe. To make matters worse, the god of destruction made several provocative gestures, greatly irritating him. The hand-to-hand combat between man and god in Ragnarok was now more thrilling than ever, accompanied by thunderous cheers from the stands. Shiva himself was highly ecstatic, thoroughly enjoying the atmosphere of the arena. Not wanting to disappoint the god of destruction, Raiden prepared to unleash his true power. Returning to the past, many years ago, the 3-year-old Raiden was still unable to stand on his own 2 feet, causing his parents great worry. They could only pray that their son would grow up safe and healthy. However, one day, upon returning home, they were deeply surprised to see young Raiden attempting to walk on his own. But moments later, all of Raiden's bones broke, leaving him unable to stand, while his muscles continuously spasmed without stopping. It turned out that Raiden's muscles were so excessively powerful that they crushed his own skeletal structure. From then on, Raiden practiced walking every day, while his mother constantly had to bandage and splint his limbs. Over time, his muscles developed and generated new muscle fibers that acted as an outer shell to suppress the rebellious ones, a condition known as the 100 Seals. In today's battle, Raiden would release his body from the 100 Seals to fight the god of destruction. He flexed his muscles to their absolute limit, risking being crushed by his own strength at any moment. Seeing this, Shiva thought Raiden had lost his mind, unaware that a Valkyrie resided within Raiden, helping him control his volatile muscles. At this moment, Raiden fully released the 100 Seals, and his unruly muscle mass was perfectly stabilized by Thrud. According to Brunhilde, this was the man with the strongest muscles in human history. Now, Raiden could finally fight with every ounce of strength he possessed. Before striking, Raiden warned Shiva to be careful and not to fall too soon. Immediately after, Raiden charged in and threw a punch so heavy that Shiva had to raise all 4 of his arms to block it. This was followed by a relentless barrage of punches that Shiva could not evade, forcing him backward. Gaining momentum, Raiden pressed the attack, driving his forearm straight into Shiva's jaw, sending the god of destruction crashing face first into the ground. Up in the stands, the sumo wrestlers were immensely proud of Raiden and his spectacular performance, while the divine faction could not help but worry after Shiva took such a devastating blow. Seeing Shiva staggering to his feet, Raiden approached to finish the match. However, when Raiden attempted a brutal headbutt, Shiva countered with his own incredibly durable skull. Shiva then struck Raiden's abdomen and unleashed a flurry of punches to his face, pushing the wrestler back. Shiva boasted that his head was just as sturdy as Raiden's. Following this, Shiva charged forward, using all 4 arms to deliver a relentless barrage of punches that left Raiden struggling to defend himself. Seizing an opening, Shiva landed 2 immensely powerful strikes directly to the wrestler's midsection. Everyone thought Raiden was down, but he unexpectedly grabbed hold of one of Shiva's arms. Channeling his ultimate muscular strength, Raiden crushed it, causing Shiva to scream out in agony. Fortunately, Shiva managed to use his legs to break free and save his arm from being completely obliterated. The entire divine faction was in disbelief that the god of destruction was being so heavily battered by a mere human. Furthermore, Raiden's muscles had now stabilized and shifted back into their optimal positions. Raiden's sheer dominance forced the gods to begin praying for Shiva's victory, but the deities who knew Shiva well were aware that the god of destruction still had a vast amount of hidden power yet to be unleashed. At that moment, his peers began chanting Shiva's name to cheer him on. Not wanting to disappoint them, Shiva raised his hand high to signal that he was still perfectly fine. He then gathered his strength and lunged forward to throw a punch at Raiden, but because one of his arms had been crushed, his body was severely off balance. When Shiva exposed an opening, Raiden landed a heavy blow straight to the god of destruction's face. However, Shiva countered with an incredibly heavy punch that caused Raiden's arm to cave inward. It turned out that Shiva's strike carried the combined strength of 1,116 deities. Yet, Raiden paid no mind to this and continued to rain a barrage of punches upon Shiva's face. After exchanging countless blows, the two grabbed each other by the head and engaged in a relentless headbutting contest to see whose skull was tougher. It was then that the god of destruction realized it had been a millennium since he last felt such fiery passion in an arena. In ancient times, the Indian pantheon was filled with numerous deities who fiercely competed with one another for power. But ultimately, no single god could unite them all. In a secluded forest nearby lived 2 nameless gods, Shiva and Rudra. While Shiva spent his days playing around, Rudra trained diligently to increase his strength. Despite their polar opposite personalities, the two were incredibly close friends. Because the gods of the Indian realm were constantly engaged in fierce competition, the pair inevitably found themselves in brawls with other deities. Fighting side by side, they came to consider each other their absolute best friends. Unlike the carefree Shiva, Rudra harbored a burning dream. Upon hearing this, Shiva laughed uproariously, believing that only humans possessed dreams and that gods had no need for them. Rudra revealed that he always wanted to stand at the very peak of the Indian pantheon, as from up there, he could witness beautiful sights no one had ever seen. However, making the journey alone would be too lonely, so Rudra invited Shiva to join him. A playful god like Shiva had no interest in standing at the peak of the divine realm, but since hanging out with Rudra was always fun, he accepted the offer. Thus, the two fools set off to conquer the summit of the Indian pantheon. Initially, everyone looked down on and ridiculed them, but together, the two managed to defeat numerous other gods to carve a path to the top. The very deities who had once despised Shiva and Rudra began to respect them. From then on, they endured countless grueling battles against mighty gods. With every deity they defeated, they inherited their opponent's title and shouldered their dreams. Though the journey was arduous, neither of them backed down from any challenge. Whenever they vanquished a powerful opponent, Shiva would carelessly dance in celebration. Conversely, Rudra felt no joy as he realized Shiva was actually stronger than him. Rudra knew that one day, the two of them would inevitably have to fight each other to determine the true victor. After a long series of exhausting battles, their final remaining opponents were the god of creation and the god of preservation. Ultimately, Shiva and Rudra emerged victorious and became legends, having defeated a total of 1,115 gods to ascend to the pinnacle of the divine realm. Standing in such a magnificent place thrilled Shiva, but Rudra's demeanor was highly contemplative and entirely devoid of joy. He believed that only the single strongest god deserved to stand at the peak of the pantheon. The gods Rudra had previously defeated had always reminded him never to lose to anyone. Not wanting to let them down, Rudra challenged his best friend Shiva to see who was truly stronger. Shiva knew that once Rudra made up his mind, nothing could stop him. Therefore, the two had to engage in one final battle to determine the ultimate victor. Punches were continuously thrown, and the resulting shockwaves echoed throughout the entire Indian realm. The two gods fought tirelessly, their sweat turning into a torrential rainstorm. However, the final moment eventually arrived. Despite being repeatedly knocked down by Shiva, Rudra continued to stand back up to fight to the bitter end. Many times, Shiva silently begged Rudra to stay down, knowing that if they continued, one of them would surely die. Yet, because Rudra was too stubborn, Shiva had no other choice. He falsely claimed that Rudra was too strong and offered to surrender. However, Rudra knew perfectly well that Shiva was holding back, so he declared that Shiva was the true victor of the match. At that moment, all 1,116 gods were gathered at the peak of the Indian pantheon. Rudra passed all their dreams onto Shiva, asking his best friend to shoulder the burden. From then on, Shiva became the undisputed leader of the Indian gods. Now, Shiva carried their hopes and dreams into the battle of Ragnarok. For that reason, he absolutely could not afford to lose to Raiden. Meanwhile, numerous Indian deities, including Rudra, had arrived to watch Shiva fight. They all knew that while Shiva was normally a very kind-hearted god, he would transform into a ferocious beast upon entering battle. At this moment, Shiva heavily pounded his chest and began a rhythmic movement known as the war dance. According to Hermes, this was the very weapon Shiva used to unify the entire Indian pantheon. Shiva then surged forward at blistering speeds, making it impossible for Raiden to land a hit. Conversely, Shiva landed a multitude of punches squarely on Raiden's face. Although Raiden attempted to counterattack using a lion-like stance, Shiva easily evaded it, planted his foot squarely on Raiden's back, and delivered a devastating uppercut. Shiva continued to run in circles, simultaneously dancing and relentlessly pummeling Raiden. The non-stop strikes, accompanied by an unpredictable searing heat, made it seem as though Raiden was being attacked by multiple opponents at once. To defend against Shiva's onslaught, Raiden drastically concentrated his muscle mass into his arms. But Shiva issued a challenge, eager to see whether his dance or Raiden's muscles were stronger. By now, Shiva's body was burning vibrantly in tandem with his war dance. After a relentless exchange of blows, Shiva used his feet to strike both of Raiden's arms downward. He then leaped high into the air and delivered a fiery kick, inflicting a severe burning laceration on Raiden's body. Witnessing this devastating attack, the gods were convinced that Shiva had secured victory in this fifth match. However, Raiden merely responded with a dangerous smile. While humanity appeared to be backed into a corner, the sumo wrestlers who had previously faced Raiden thought otherwise. Upon seeing his smile, they relaxed and confidently stated that it was finally time for him to showcase the true power of a sumo wrestler. Since childhood, Raiden had a deep love for sumo, but the martial art initially seemed unsuited for him. Because his body was restricted by the 100 seals, he could not unleash his full potential. Nevertheless, he remained a monster. With a single headbutt, he effortlessly defeated the best sumo wrestler in his village. Terrified by this horrifying strength, the villagers began calling him a demon. From then on, no one dared to play with Raiden, leading him to curse the gods for being so cruel as to grant him such a physique. However, his mother felt immense gratitude toward the divine. Before Raiden could walk, she had prayed fervently for the gods to bless her son with a strong and healthy body. Therefore, she firmly believed that his terrifying strength was a gift bestowed by the divine. As Raiden grew older, he became a kind-hearted young man in the village. However, a massive natural disaster soon struck, forever altering his future. The eruption of Mount Asama destroyed all of the village's crops. A severe famine followed, claiming the lives of many villagers, and Raiden decided he had to step up to save those who were weaker than himself. Bidding farewell to his parents, Raiden left for a distant land to make a living. He traveled to Edo with the dream of becoming a professional sumo wrestler to earn money to send back to his hometown. Possessing immense strength, Raiden was terrified of accidentally hurting others. A sumo wrestler named Oseki invited Raiden to a spar to test his skills. Raiden assumed he could easily overpower the man just as he had with his peers in the village, but Oseki demonstrated masterful sumo techniques, repeatedly throwing Raiden to the ground. Through this sparring session, Raiden realized that sumo was an incredibly challenging discipline, far more complex than he had originally thought. Under Oseki's strict tutelage, Raiden relentlessly absorbed the fundamentals of sumo. He trained tirelessly to become a professional wrestler. 2 years later, Raiden stood on a highly prestigious sumo stage. Although his physique was leaner than other wrestlers, he defeated many of the era's strongest fighters. His master, Oseki, even felt as though he had unleashed a monster upon the world. From that day forward, Raiden became a legend in the sumo world. His fame reached his hometown, making the villagers and his mother incredibly proud. However, his glorious streak did not last long, as other opponents became utterly terrified to face him. Consequently, in one match, Raiden intentionally lost, greatly angering his master. Tearfully, Raiden explained that his mother had always taught him to protect the weak, yet he was now using his strength to bully them. To continue making a living without severely injuring his opponents, Raiden devised a solution. He selected his 4 strongest techniques and sealed them away as forbidden moves, vowing never to use them again. Even with these restrictions, Raiden continued to win match after match and send money back home. Years later, his illustrious sumo career ended due to his age. Yet now, Raiden found himself reliving the thrill of grappling against an overwhelmingly powerful opponent like Shiva. At this moment, Raiden decided to fully unseal his body to unleash his most devastating sumo techniques. Shiva was highly ecstatic, eager to see what Raiden's new power had to offer. Not wanting to keep the deity waiting, Raiden instantly utilized one of his forbidden moves, an open palm thrust. Raiden lunged forward, channeling all his muscular strength into his palm, and executed a lethal strike that blew past Shiva's defensive arms and hit him directly in the face. The impact sent the god of destruction flying backward, cleanly severing 2 of his arms from his body. Everyone assumed Shiva would succumb to this attack, but he managed to stand back up despite having only 1 arm left. Zeus explained that if Shiva hadn't used his arms to block, his head would have been completely blown off. The previous strike generated a massive shockwave capable of breaking the sound barrier, an impact no one but a god like Shiva could withstand. Although Shiva was critically injured, Raiden's muscles also suffered severe damage. According to Brunhilde, the previous technique required his muscles to move at terrifyingly high speeds, placing extreme pressure on Raiden and making him feel as though his body was tearing itself apart. Fortunately, the Valkyrie Thrud used her power to hold Raiden's body together. Despite this, Raiden refused to stop, asking Thrud to help his muscles move even faster. Thrud warned him that doing so would completely destroy his muscles and internal organs. However, Raiden pleaded with her, stating that he had dedicated his entire life and soul to the art of sumo. Deeply moved and proud, Thrud realized this was truly the man she loved. The two merged completely to fight with everything they had. Looking back, Shiva noticed his friend Rudra had arrived to cheer him on. Beside him stood countless other Indian deities, placing all their hopes in the leader of their pantheon. Unwilling to lose, Shiva decided to unleash his ultimate technique. His body began to radiate divine energy, and with his remaining hand, he gripped his chest. Shiva stimulated his own heart, forcing it to beat faster, significantly raising his body temperature until he erupted into a blazing inferno. At this point, both the human and divine warriors had surpassed their limits. Shouldering the immense hopes and dreams of others, both fighters were absolutely determined to claim victory in this final clash. The two charged at each other, causing the Valhalla arena to burn fiercely. The entire audience watched intently, knowing these were the final, deciding moments. Raiden attempted his lethal palm strike once more, but it seemed to have lost its effectiveness. The god of destruction stood firm, sporting a dangerous smile. Shiva now effortlessly dodged Raiden's palm strikes, and whenever he landed a blow on Raiden, the wrestler's muscles were instantly scorched to a crisp. Recognizing that dragging out the fight would eliminate Raiden's chances of winning, Hermes noted that Shiva was also continuously stimulating his own heart to maintain the flames. If the battle went on too long, Shiva's body would be completely incinerated by his own fire. Therefore, both warriors were essentially burning away their own lifespans for these decisive attacks. Up in the stands, Raiden's parents and comrades passionately cheered and prayed for him. Down in the arena, Shiva launched attacks from every angle, making it impossible for Raiden to defend. Although Raiden managed to grab Shiva for a throw, the deity skillfully countered, forcing Raiden to endure a relentless, storm-like barrage of strikes. Despite taking numerous heavy blows, Raiden's arms and knees never touched the ground. The continuous chants of his name from the stands provided him with a massive surge of motivation. Instantly, Raiden executed a powerful headbutt, knocking Shiva a considerable distance away. Because Shiva had maintained the flames for too long, his remaining arm was also severed from his body. Nevertheless, Shiva received encouragement from his best friend, the storm god Rudra. Refusing to let Rudra down, Shiva charged at Raiden, engulfed in a brilliant blaze. The entire arena erupted in awe at the sheer intensity of the battle. Both warriors bore immense responsibilities and were clashing in the greatest fight of their lives with everything they had. Finally, the critical moment arrived. Raiden channeled every last ounce of his remaining strength to execute one final open palm strike. Shiva looked ecstatic, fully prepared to take his opponent's ultimate technique head-on. As Raiden focused his muscular power into his palm and thrust it forward, Shiva instantly executed a spinning kick. The clash resulted in Raiden's arm being split down the middle, with half of it reduced to ashes by the flames. Following this decisive exchange, Raiden thanked Shiva for giving him such an incredible match. Exhausted and with no regrets, Raiden asked Thrud to release the fusion so he could bid her farewell. However, Thrud had vowed to never leave the man she loved. Deeply touched, Raiden thanked Thrud, calling her the most wonderful woman in the world. Seeing this, Shiva acknowledged Raiden as a true man. Immediately after, Shiva delivered a final kick, sending Raiden to the afterlife, and thanked the wrestler for the greatest match of his life. Raiden's soul, alongside the Valkyrie Thrud, shattered into countless fragments. The fifth match concluded with a victory for the divine faction. The gods expressed profound respect for the martial art of sumo. Normally, in a freestyle fight, Raiden would have been no match for the supreme brawler Shiva. However, through the rigorous discipline of sumo, Raiden had managed to sever 3 of Shiva's arms and nearly take his life. In the stands, the sumo wrestlers mourned Raiden's passing. They collectively stomped their feet, ringing out a traditional funeral toll for the great wrestler. Shiva returned inside to reunite with his closest friend, the storm god Rudra. Other Indian deities also approached to congratulate the god of destruction on his hard-fought victory. Zeus arrived to check on Shiva's condition, and Shiva admitted to the godfather of the cosmos that humanity was indeed incredibly strong. Gull grieved deeply for the sister she was so close to. She couldn't hold back her tears, knowing that Thrud ultimately chose to die alongside the man she loved. Although she knew it was all to protect humanity, Gull felt the price was far too steep. Brunhilde then repeated Adam's words, "When protecting those important to you, no reason is needed." She then retreated to the memorial room for the fallen warriors. Outwardly, Brunhilde always maintained the facade of a strong older sister. Inside, however, she was deeply vulnerable and constantly mourned their sacrifices. Yet, no matter the cost, she was fully committed to saving humanity. Meanwhile, Zeus was searching everywhere for Buddha, eventually finding him relaxing and enjoying the breeze while eating candy. Seeing that Buddha had delicious snacks, Zeus seemed eager to have some, but despite his requests, Buddha refused to share a single piece, leaving Zeus quite irritated. Zeus then suggested that Buddha should be the representative to fight in the sixth match. Upon hearing this, Buddha curiously asked why the gods were so determined to destroy humanity. Zeus replied that when the gods participate in a tournament, they must win and cannot afford to lose to mere humans. However, Buddha continued to playfully dodge the core issue without stating his intentions clearly, which greatly angered the old god. To cool Zeus's temper, Buddha whispered into his ear, hoping he would enjoy watching the upcoming match. Meanwhile, Gull was heading to the medical bay to find bandages for Brunhilde's injuries. There, she overheard the 7 lucky gods conversing. The one from earlier seemed deeply resentful of Buddha and claimed that someone named Zerofuku would appear to punish him. Before Gel could figure out who Zerofuku was, the others caught her eavesdropping. Consequently, she was dragged into the room for an interrogation. Fortunately, Jack the Ripper appeared shortly after to rescue Gull. The sixth match of Ragnarok was about to begin. The next representative for the divine faction was a deity who had once saved humanity and guided them out of the Dark Ages, Gautama Buddha. However, when Buddha appeared, Heimdall noticed something was amiss. Buddha borrowed the apocalyptic horn to announce that he would be representing the human faction in this battle, a declaration that left all the gods unable to contain their fury. Buddha even pointed his staff at Zeus, declaring that if the gods would not save humanity, he would step forward to do it himself, and he would kill any god who dared to stand in his way. Gautama Buddha was a deity who had left his family and abandoned all worldly desires, achieving true enlightenment in just 6 years. From then on, this deity always acted and fought entirely on his own, a god who rightfully bore the title, "Throughout heaven and earth, I alone am the honored one." Humanity deeply revered this deity, calling him Gautama Buddha. Thus, Buddha was present to declare to everyone that he would stand on the side of mankind. Upon hearing this, the divine audience immediately threw insults at him, calling him a disgrace to the gods and demanding he be removed from the tournament. But Buddha instantly crushed the horn in his hand, silencing everyone. He then reaffirmed his stance with humanity, reiterating that he would kill any god who dared to oppose him. The audience from both sides was left in sheer shock. The Indian god of destruction and the thunder god, Thor, were the only ones who did not seem surprised. However, the other gods were incredibly bitter, viewing Buddha's actions as an absolute betrayal. Gull was highly astonished to see Buddha suddenly siding with humanity, but Brunhilde had calculated everything from the very beginning. She explained that Buddha inherently held the title of the Honored One, meaning he would never take orders from any other deity. Before the sixth match took place, Brunhilde had unexpectedly encountered Buddha just after she had been weeping for the fallen warriors. Buddha, while casually eating popcorn, asked her why she was crying. Naturally, Brunhilde replied that she was mourning the fighters who had lost their lives in Ragnarok. Buddha didn't care much about these matters. He simply finished his popcorn and informed Brunhilde that Zeus had chosen him as the divine representative for the sixth match. However, Buddha stated that he would fight for humanity, rather than listen to that old man. Seeing Brunhilde's indifferent reaction, Buddha felt a bit underwhelmed. It turned out that before Ragnarok even started, Brunhilde had sought out Buddha to learn about Valundr, the technique that allowed human warriors to bind their souls with the Valkyries to fight together. This proved that Brunhilde had planned everything from the start. Buddha asked Brunhilde if she had schemed for him to fight the other gods. Brunhilde denied having such intentions, but admitted she knew a fundamental truth. No one in Valhalla despised the divine authority as much as Buddha did. Hearing this, Buddha laughed heartily, realizing Brunhilde knew him very well. Yet, Buddha also knew Brunhilde was someone willing to do whatever it took to achieve her goals. He gently reminded her that he absolutely despised being manipulated, before walking away, leaving Brunhilde momentarily stricken with fear. Now, Buddha stood on the side of humanity, exactly as Brunhilde had hoped. Seeing this, Heimdall tried to stop Buddha, explaining that the divine representatives were already registered, so changing factions was not allowed. But Zeus stepped down and declared that he did not mind the change. When Heimdall questioned this, Zeus reiterated that while Ragnarok's rules originally called for 13 fighters from both gods and humans, allowing Buddha to fight for humanity would only make the tournament more exciting. Zeus even wanted to step into the arena a second time to battle Buddha. However, Buddha wasn't afraid of Zeus in the slightest, stating that if Zeus wanted to fight, he would gladly indulge him. Up in the stands, Odin, asked Buddha if he was truly ready to make enemies out of all the gods. Finding Odin slightly annoying, Buddha had to remind him that he didn't care about gods or humans. In this universe, he only cared about himself. Ignoring the curses hurled by the divine spectators, Buddha remained entirely nonchalant. Meanwhile, Loki was incredibly furious that Buddha was fighting for humanity, but couldn't do anything about it. Soon after, Buddha asked Zeus who his opponent in this round would be, and Zeus replied that the divine representative had already been decided. Just then, golden lights beamed down from the sky, accompanied by repeated chants of divine punishment. A dragon-headed airship descended right into the center of the Valhalla arena. On board, all the members of the 7 lucky gods slowly disembarked and stood before Buddha. Zeus left the rest to their leader. Heimdall was utterly confused, unsure of who to announce as the divine representative, as he couldn't allow all 7 gods to gang up on Buddha. However, their leader declared that the 7 of them were inherently just one entity. He then prepared for a fusion sequence that appeared rather bizarre. One by one, the other members of the 7 lucky gods charged toward their leader and merged into his body, leaving the audience speechless, unable to find the right words to describe the grotesque transformation. After a few minutes, all the 7 lucky gods had combined into a single, complete form. According to legend, the 7 lucky gods were the 7 deities who governed the world's fortunes. It was once said that there was an 8th deity alongside them, but the truth was that the 8th god and the other 7 were merely fictional oral traditions. In reality, there was only one god of fortune. When this deity descended to the mortal realm, heaven would crumble, and all fortune would disappear. The true name of this deity was Zerofuku. The moment Zerofuku appeared, he declared his intent to slaughter Buddha right then and there. He then performed a few warm-up stretches before entering combat. Zerofuku became visibly annoyed when Buddha showed absolutely no interest in what he was doing. Muttering to himself, he pulled a horrifyingly grotesque weapon from within his own body. It was a massive cleaver, surrounded by writhing, fleshy tentacles. Everyone who saw it was terrified by the appearance of the entity supposedly known as the god of fortune. Even Ares couldn't believe a deity with such a sinister form existed. But Hermes explained that Zerofuku was a god capable of turning misfortune into fortune. This 6th match had truly turned into a battle of pure hatred. At that moment, Heimdall received a text confirming the divine representative had been changed to Zerofuku. Paying it no further mind, he announced the official start of the 6th match. The representative for humanity was Gautama Buddha, while the divine representative was Zerofuku, setting the stage for a tense and dramatic round of Ragnarok. Gull was highly curious about who Zerofuku was and the bizarre fusion she had just witnessed. Brunhilde explained that Zerofuku was the true form of the 7 lucky gods. This was also the first time she had ever witnessed their most powerful state. Originally, Zerofuku was a deity who spread good fortune wherever he went, but the misfortune festering inside him eventually twisted his mind. In ancient Asia, several gods resided in the mortal realm to protect humanity. Zerofuku was one such deity who lived closely with humans and nature. He possessed a heart purer and kinder than anyone else. However, upon descending to the mortal realm, all Zerofuku saw was the immense suffering humanity endured. They were engulfed by countless hardships and immeasurable misfortune. Therefore, Zerofuku believed that if he eliminated the source of their misery, humanity would be saved. He immediately went to a critically ill boy and used his power to absorb the sickness, taking the suffering upon himself. Within minutes, the boy was able to walk normally without feeling any pain. From then on, many people worshipped Zerofuku as a savior deity. The method Zerofuku used was to absorb humanity's misfortune to grant them happiness. But after spending time saving humanity, Zerofuku reached his limit. Having absorbed so much misfortune from the humans, his body began to experience agonizing pain. Yet, Zerofuku felt incredibly happy because he was doing something beneficial for humanity. Years later, Zerofuku returned to the very village he had saved to see if the people had found happiness. However, upon his arrival, those humans revealed their true nature. Reality showed Zerofuku that the more he erased their misfortunes, the less humans appreciated their happiness. Even the young boy he had saved years ago now looked down on him, insulting him as a filthy piece of trash. Although he witnessed all this, Zerofuku refused to believe it was true. He couldn't understand why, after shouldering all their suffering, these people still couldn't grasp true happiness. Just then, a group of ascetics with emaciated bodies walked past. Initially, Zerofuku thought they had heard of his name and come to ask for salvation. To his surprise, the deity leading this group was Gautama Buddha. Even though these followers were impoverished and gaunt, their faces radiated boundless joy and happiness. Seeing this, Zerofuku called out for Buddha to stop and demanded an explanation. Buddha initially thought the boy wanted to eat some of his beans, but Zerofuku furiously brushed the question aside. He demanded to know why Buddha's followers were so happy, while the people he had absorbed countless misfortunes for were not happy at all. Buddha gently bit into a soybean and explained that happiness is not something that can be handed out. It must be achieved through one's own effort. Therefore, if anyone desires true happiness, they must carry burdens equal to that desire. These were the very words spoken by the Enlightened One, later recorded in Buddhist scriptures. The teachings of Gautama Buddha captivated the commoners, who listened intently. Buddha then told Zerofuku that if he wished to understand more, he should pack his things and join them on their journey. However, going through puberty, Zerofuku viewed this as a profound humiliation and ran away in tears. He became intensely jealous of Buddha, believing he was more deserving of humanity's worship. After all, he had saved so many people, yet no one accepted him. The pent-up frustration within Zerofuku boiled over, twisting his love into pure hatred. At that moment, Zerofuku had only one thought: to find a way to destroy humanity. Suddenly, some passers-by mistook Zerofuku for a demon, and when he turned around, they fled in terror. Zerofuku immediately gave chase, intending to murder a mother and her child. But when he saw the child's face, Zerofuku recoiled in extreme agony. His body emitted a blinding light, and he subsequently split into 7 separate souls. These were 7 distinct entities, later known as the 7 Lucky Gods. They appeared to halt Zerofuku's wrath, otherwise he would have annihilated humanity. However, they all harbored deep resentment toward Buddha and swore that one day they would take his life. From then on, a folk legend arose about the 7 Lucky Gods, as well as the myth of an 8th deity. Now, all the 7 Lucky Gods had merged back into a single body, causing Zerofuku to manifest once more. Right here, Zerofuku intended to slaughter Buddha to wash away the humiliation of the past. But before he could finish his sentence, Buddha delivered a swift kick to his abdomen and casually stated that he didn't remember who Zerofuku was. The sudden kick caught Zerofuku completely off guard, leaving him in visible pain. Gol couldn't help but wonder if Buddha had cheated by attacking so early, but Hermes noted that a rule was still a rule. Once the match was announced to start, the fighters were free to engage each other by any means necessary. Infuriated, Zerofuku grabbed his battle axe. The weapon had writhing tentacles, making it look almost like a living creature. He swung the massive axe wildly in every direction, but Buddha easily dodged every single strike despite the frantic assault. Unable to land even a graze on Buddha, Zerofuku's performance made the divine audience increasingly anxious, as he merely seemed to be flailing his weapon randomly without hitting his mark. Meanwhile, Zerofuku convinced himself that his inability to land a hit was simply due to his immense misfortune. This anger caused the axe in Zerofuku's hands to sprout numerous eyes and grow significantly in size. Upon returning to the stands, Zeus explained that this axe, known as the Misery Cleaver, had the ability to absorb misfortune. The more misery it absorbed, the larger and more destructive it became. Holding the now gigantic cleaver, Zerofuku charged at Buddha. His downward slash was so powerful that it split the arena floor in 2. According to Brunhilde, every time Zerofuku missed an attack, he viewed it as his own misfortune, so the more he missed, the larger his axe grew. In other words, the more Buddha dodged, the stronger the axe became. After dodging for a while, Buddha casually did a handstand and clapped his feet together, completely mocking Zerofuku and infuriating him even further. Gol was amazed and asked how Buddha could continuously dodge so many rapid attacks. Brunhilde explained that in combat, Buddha could evade an attack before Zerofuku even launched it. Unlike Kojiro, who dodged using experience in combat simulation, Buddha's movement was entirely different and could be described as precognition. This was a power that only an enlightened deity like Buddha possessed. Down in the arena, as Zerofuku kept demanding to know why he couldn't hit his opponent, Buddha instantly lunged forward and struck him in the face with his staff. Buddha simply stated that he would only attack whenever he felt like it. Afterward, he went back to effortlessly evading all of Zerofuku's strikes. Seeing that Zerofuku looked somewhat pathetic, Buddha revealed that he could see Zerofuku's attacks before they happened, which was why the god could never touch him. When Zerofuku refused to believe it, Buddha demonstrated the vast gap in their power. He casually dodged and landed attacks on Zerofuku's body with utmost ease. Against the Enlightened One, all of Zerofuku's attacks were rendered completely useless. Buddha's ability to see into the future made Zerofuku feel utterly powerless, causing the hatred within him to surge once again. A dark aura emanated from his body, surprising even Buddha. Now, towering before Buddha was a colossal axe that covered the entire Valhalla arena. It featured 7 blades, harboring an immense amount of Zerofuku's accumulated misery. Knowing he couldn't simply dodge this massive swing, Buddha stood his ground. From his staff, Buddha invoked the power of the 6 realms, releasing ethereal scrolls of scripture. Zerofuku slammed his massive axe down, unleashing an impact that seemed to devastate the entire arena. Everyone assumed Buddha couldn't possibly survive the blow. However, the 4th realm of Buddha's technique, the 11-faced Avalokitesvara, transformed his staff into a giant shield, successfully halting Zerofuku's earth-shattering strike. Buddha then promised that he would cure the boy's puberty-induced temper tantrum. As Brunhilde knew, Buddha's shield was the divine weapon of the 6 realms. Each realm housed a guardian bodhisattva, and their powers resided within his staff. Depending on Buddha's emotions, the staff would change its form to become a different divine weapon. At this moment, Buddha used the shield to push away Zerofuku's giant axe. But the god's anger continued to rise, causing the axe to transform further. In response, Buddha activated the 2nd realm of his staff. Reflecting his current emotion, the weapon transformed into a short sword. Buddha instantly dashed forward, evaded Zerofuku's axe, and delivered a direct blow to his abdomen, causing Zerofuku to fall to the ground, clutching his stomach in pain. Watching Buddha's attacks, Brunhilde had to admit that he was the most powerful youth in history. From birth, Gautama had everything in the world. He was the crown prince of the Sakya kingdom in ancient northern India. He lived a life of luxury and received the finest education. Furthermore, he was chosen by the heavens to eventually become the ruler of the world, and his father, the king, was incredibly proud of his son's bright future. As a crown prince, Gautama was deeply loved by his people, and everyone believed that one day he would accept his destiny to become their king and guide them. Occasionally, Gautama wished he could be as free as a bird, untethered by any obligations. However, he had to brush those thoughts aside, knowing this was the destiny he had to bear. One day, Gautama visited his older cousin, King Jataka. Even though his cousin was now the ruler of a nation, Gautama still affectionately called him his older brother, just as he did when they were younger and close. Gautama told Jataka that he would eventually succeed his father as the king of Sakya, accepting it as his inevitable fate. At the time, Gautama believed that becoming a king like Jataka must be a life of profound happiness. However, Jataka revealed that he wasn't happy at all. He had dedicated his entire life to his people, but now he was severely ill and nearing the end of his days. Jataka expressed deep regret because there were still so many things in the world he hadn't experienced. Not long after, King Jataka passed away amidst the sorrow of his subjects. Many people remarked that King Jataka had lived a happy life, which startled Gautama, as he knew his cousin hadn't been happy in the slightest. The inner conflict and resentment over this reality marked the beginning of Gautama's path to enlightenment. Suddenly, Gautama laughed out loud in a carefree manner, leading many to think he had gone mad. But he merely pointed his finger to the sky, declaring that he had attained the ultimate truth. His cousin's funeral proceeded shortly after, but instead of showing sorrow, Gautama walked into the middle of the ceremony and scattered flowers as if he were celebrating. Before anyone could understand what he was doing, he approached and lifted Jataka's coffin onto his shoulders. Gautama's father was terrified, fearing his son would be punished by the gods for this sacrilege, but Gautama yelled for everyone to be quiet. He stated that Jataka didn't need their prayers for happiness, because a person's true happiness can only stem from their own heart. When Jataka was alive, he had always wanted to see how far the river flowing through his kingdom stretched. Now, Gautama was taking him down that river so he could fulfill his final wish. From that day on, Gautama left his homeland, his family, and his wife and child. He became a solitary wanderer, walking his own path. Along the way, he encountered many ascetics who were so blinded by dogmas that they starved themselves to achieve enlightenment. However, after hearing Gautama's words, they abandoned their superstitious rituals to live a life of freedom. Ever since, everything Buddha did was in defiance of the destinies the gods had imposed on humanity. Now, the Buddha stood as the most powerful youth at the pinnacle of rebellion, ready to defeat any god who dared to stand in his way. Down in the arena, despite his best efforts, Zerofuku could not land a single strike on Buddha. Consequently, he transformed his weapon into a 3-section bladed staff. In response, Buddha utilized the 6 realms to transform his staff into the 12-deva halberd, turning the match into a true clash of weapons. Both combatants charged at each other, engaging in a highly balanced head-on collision. Relying on his precognition, Buddha constantly held the advantage in dodging and counterattacking. Capitalizing on an opening, Buddha delivered a diagonal slash across Zerofuku, causing him to lose a significant amount of blood. This caused the misery within Zerofuku to multiply, evolving his weapon into a storm-like formation of numerous blades hurtling toward Buddha. However, Buddha instantly altered his own weapon as well. His halberd transformed into an ancient short sword, which he used to completely dismantle Zerofuku's attack. Relying on his evasive maneuvers and masterful swordsmanship, Buddha neutralized every single one of Zerofuku's strikes. The storm of misery blades was swiftly destroyed by Buddha, allowing him to close the distance once more. Up in the stands, the entire audience agreed that Buddha had the upper hand, which only made Zerofuku even more furious. He resented that Buddha was always the center of attention while he was constantly sidelined. Zerofuku attempted to transform his weapon once again, but it was all futile against Buddha's foresight. Buddha then offered some advice to the pubescent boy, telling Zerofuku that he needed to love himself first before expecting others to love him. Initially, Zerofuku dismissed Buddha's teachings as nonsense and refused to believe them. However, upon gazing at the radiant aura emanating from Buddha, Zerofuku achieved a moment of partial enlightenment. The massive misery cleaver in his hands gradually dissolved into nothingness, and deep down, he finally admitted that he just wanted to be loved by everyone in the same way Buddha was. In the stands, Ares could not believe his eyes, seeing Zerofuku illuminated by enlightenment, while his weapon completely vanished, completely drained of its dark power. Satisfied with the successful emotional breakthrough, Buddha tossed his weapon to the ground and challenged Zerofuku to a fair, bare-knuckle fistfight to determine the winner. Zerofuku readily accepted, and the two turned the Ragnarok match into a pure brawling contest. Although he took many punches, Zerofuku was incredibly ecstatic because he had never felt as happy as he did in that very moment. Finally, Buddha landed a solid punch squarely on Zerofuku's face, knocking him to the ground. The dark energy inside Zerofuku completely evaporated, revealing the joyful face of a true god of fortune. Zerofuku now desired to travel the world to bring happiness to everyone. But the moment he said those words, a pair of horns violently pierced through Zerofuku's head, causing him to scream in agonizing pain. Before Buddha could understand what was happening to Zerofuku, the horns buried themselves entirely into the boy's body. Then, a blue dragon and a red dragon burst forth from Zerofuku's mouth and chest. The two dragons swirled together in the air, creating a highly ominous sight. They then dove straight back down onto Zerofuku, forcing him to desperately beg Buddha for help. However, the gale force winds generated by the two dragons were too strong, leaving Buddha powerless to intervene as they fully cocooned Zerofuku's body. Minutes later, the winds ceased, leaving behind a massive dragon egg in the middle of the arena. A horrifying creature hatched and crawled out from within, prompting Buddha to immediately step back to maintain his distance, as he had no idea where this entity came from or what kind of power it possessed. When the blood washed away, the being standing there was revealed to be the demon lord of the sixth heaven, Papias, Hajun. Brunhilde and Gull had no idea who he was and looked on in absolute terror. Down in the arena, Buddha asked the creature what happened to Zerofuku. Papias laughed, stating that Zerofuku had completely evaporated and no longer existed in this world. Right now, Papias merely wanted to unleash the overflowing power contained within his new body. The gods watching were completely bewildered, not recognizing him and questioning if he was even a deity. Right then, Hades arrived and clarified that the creature was not a god. Upon seeing the ruler of the underworld, Ares grew terrified and hastily yielded his seat to him. Zeus asked his older brother to explain where this monster came from. Hades informed everyone that Papias was the legendary berserker of the demon realm. The universe consisted of 3 spatial tiers: heaven, where the gods and divine souls resided; the mortal realm, home to humanity; and the demon realm, where the damned ran rampant. A legend in the demon realm stated that when blinding light mixed with absolute darkness, the horns of the underworld would awaken, and the demon lord Papias would manifest. Even as the ruler of the underworld, Hades had never seen his face before, and even he couldn't fully explain how Zerofuku had transformed into Papias. In the arena, Papias mentioned he wasn't quite used to this new body yet. He then generated a blade from his own flesh, threatening to end Buddha's life in the blink of an eye. The blade's unimaginable weight forced Buddha to struggle defensively. What followed was an impossibly fast exchange of strikes between the two. Gull wondered if Buddha could hold his ground, but Brunhilde explained that although Buddha could see the future, he currently couldn't read Papias's attacks. Buddha's precognition relied on seeing the light of a soul. When a living creature decided to act, its soul would move slightly ahead of its physical body. However, Papias's soul was shrouded in absolute pitch-black darkness without a single speck of light. Consequently, Buddha's eyes could not track it, rendering his foresight completely useless against the demon lord. Despite this, Buddha fought the demon lord evenly in close combat without showing any signs of fear. Realizing Buddha was no ordinary opponent, Papias decided to fight with his full strength. He morphed his blade into a massive drill and lunged straight at Buddha. To defend against this, Buddha used the 6 realms to change his weapon into a shield. When the 2 divine weapons clashed, the entire Valhalla arena trembled violently. However, the demon lord's drill managed to pierce completely through the shield, gouging out one of Buddha's eyes in the process. Having wounded the enlightened one, the demon lord cracked a maniacal, psychotic smile. Everyone was in disbelief. The shield that had previously completely blocked Zerofuku's giant cleaver was effortlessly penetrated by Papias's drill. Initially, Papias had aimed to drill straight through Buddha's head, but Buddha managed to dodge just in time. Papias then manifested an axe to see how Buddha would evade his next assault, unleashing a relentless flurry of slashes that forced Buddha to desperately defend himself. Watching Buddha getting carved up brought immense joy to Loki. Because Buddha had lost his left eye, Papias continuously targeted his blind spot. He hacked away while muttering unhinged phrases about divine punishment, looking like an absolute madman. Buddha was steadily losing ground against the demon lord's relentless onslaught. According to Hades, no god was fit to be Papias's opponent, as he was a monster who had once destroyed half of the underworld. The other half only survived because he vanished as abruptly as he had appeared. Hades had ruled the underworld for centuries without seeing him return, leading him to believe Papias only existed in fairy tales. Therefore, if Papias had manifested here, someone must have recovered his remnants, nurtured them like a seed, and implanted them into Zerofuku's body. Ares was horrified, wondering what deity could be so evil. According to Hades, the culprit was highly likely Beelzebub, who was, at that very moment, watching Buddha's Ragnarok match through a monitor. Down in the arena, Buddha was being completely overwhelmed by Papias. He had sustained numerous injuries from the demon lord's relentless slashes. Seeing Buddha take such a beating, the divine audience felt a deep sense of satisfaction, cheering for Papias and hoping he would finish off the enlightened one. At this point, Buddha asked Papias if Zerofuku was still inside him. Papias laughed uproariously, revealing that he had entirely swallowed Zerofuku to absorb his nutrients. Hearing this, Buddha was consumed by absolute fury, swearing that he would destroy the monster right there in Valhalla. The emotion of hatred within Buddha caused his staff to shift to the 5th realm, known as the Preta realm, the realm of the hungry ghost. The staff transformed into a shape that even Buddha had never seen before, a giant scythe named the Great Cleaver of the 6 realms. For a compassionate being like Buddha, the gods felt that this weapon did not suit him at all. Down in the arena, Papias maintained a scornful smile, dismissing Buddha as a weakling daring to oppose a supreme being. Buddha paid no attention to this, gripping the scythe to execute his karma-destroying samsara slash. Although Papias managed to block the strike, he was pushed far back by Buddha's power. Immediately after, the demon lord knocked the scythe away and aimed his weapon directly at Buddha. Refusing to yield, Buddha spun around, greatly accelerating the scythe's momentum, and lunged at his opponent. The result, however, was that Buddha's scythe was blocked, and his abdomen was impaled by Papias's weapon. Everyone watched in absolute shock, witnessing Buddha on the verge of defeat at the hands of the demon lord. Papias asked Buddha if he had any last words. This question infuriated Buddha, who reminded the monster that he would never forgive anyone who dared to stop him from saving humanity. Despite being severely injured, Buddha pressed his scythe deeply into Papias's arm, causing the demon lord to feel actual pain and forcing him to kick Buddha away to break free. Papias could not comprehend what kind of strength kept Buddha alive after such a fatal thrust. Seeing the demon lord begin to tremble, Buddha mocked him, asking if he was wetting his pants in fear. This taunt deeply provoked Papias, who angrily told Buddha to know his place. In the past, Papias had been destroyed by his own overwhelming power, but his current body had evolved far beyond that weak prior form. Yet, Buddha pointed straight at his face and called him exceptionally weak, stating that he was even weaker than Zerofuku. Enraged, the demon lord demanded Buddha prove his words, unleashing a relentless barrage of attacks that forced the enlightened one into a tight defensive stance. Hades thought Buddha was foolish for continuing to fight with such fatal wounds, but the resolve in Buddha's remaining eye told the Lord of the Underworld that he hadn't given up yet. At this moment, Buddha was waiting for the perfect opportunity to turn the tide. Despite launching countless attacks, Papias could not make Buddha submit. The enlightened one stood firm, even with his body covered in severe injuries. From above, Hades noticed that the monster of the underworld was beginning to tremble in fear in a highly abnormal manner. Papias was clearly winning, yet his body was inexplicably shaking. To stabilize his mind, the demon lord forcefully crushed his own left arm, severing it completely, and then transformed his weapon into a massive broadsword, ready for the final clash against Buddha. Unafraid, Buddha charged forward again using his karma-destroying Samsara slash. Empowering his broadsword with incredible strength, Papias unleashed a devastating swing that completely shattered Buddha's scythe. Consequently, the six-realm staff reverted to its original form. Not stopping there, Papias lunged forward again, forcing Buddha to block with the staff, but it too was quickly shattered, sending Buddha flying backward. Watching Buddha seemingly on the verge of falling, Beelzebub felt immensely satisfied. Meanwhile, humanity prayed with all their hearts for Buddha, hoping he could still pull out a victory. Down in the arena, Buddha seemed to have no way left to fight Papias, as his only divine weapon had been destroyed by the demon lord. Just as despair loomed, a ray of light appeared right beside him. Reaching out, Buddha unexpectedly touched something of profound importance, instantly revitalizing his spirit. He broke into a joyful smile, and his laughter left the entire audience bewildered. Papias assumed Buddha had lost his mind knowing death was near, but Buddha immediately sat up with an aura of absolute confidence. He slowly rose to his feet, letting his long hair flow freely, and revealed the misery cleaver, the very weapon Zerofuku had left behind before being consumed by the demon lord. The cleaver now looked exactly like a Valkyrie's divine weapon. Buddha had perfectly mastered his ultimate technique, Völunder, the very technique he had taught Brunhilde, so the Valkyries could bond with human warriors. Instead of absorbing misfortune, the cleaver had now absorbed Buddha's immense love for humanity, transforming into an ultimate divine weapon that only an enlightened being like him could create. Immediately after, the cleaver evolved into the great Nirvana sword, Zero. The blinding light it emitted sent Papias into a fit of rage. With this blade housing the combined power of the seven lucky gods, Buddha declared that the demon lord would face divine retribution. Armed with this new divine weapon, Buddha engaged Papias in a perfectly matched head-on duel. In the stands, the audience cheered with all their souls. Even his older cousin Jataka was present, rooting for his brother's victory. Papias began to tremble in fear once more, unable to fathom how Buddha refused to surrender despite being nearly drained of all his strength. To make matters worse for the demon lord, Buddha wore a smile, genuinely enjoying the battle. Buddha then deflected Papias' weapon and delivered a clean slash across his chest. Although Buddha was turning the tide, many realized he was still critically injured, fearing he might collapse before he could swing the final finishing blow. Down in the arena, Buddha relentlessly attacked while simultaneously defending against Papias' strikes. Capitalizing on an opening when the demon lord overextended, Buddha landed another slash on his chest, but regretted that the cut wasn't deep enough. It seemed Buddha had reached his absolute limit, but miraculously, his soul-seeing eye activated once again, allowing him to dodge Papias's next attack. As Brunhilde explained, Papias's soul was normally shrouded in absolute darkness, but the growing fear inside him had caused a faint light to flicker within his soul, granting Buddha the ability to foresee his movements once more. A supreme being who had once destroyed the demon realm was now entirely outmatched by Buddha. Fueled by rage, Papias raised his broadsword and brought it down on Buddha with all his might. Everyone thought Buddha's body had been split in two by the devastating slash, but it was merely an afterimage. Buddha had smoothly maneuvered behind the demon lord. As Papias slowly turned around, Buddha raised his sword high. He silently called out to Zerofuku, affirming that this was the path they would walk together, before unleashing a decisive slash that sent the demon lord straight to dust. The monster's body crumbled into pieces amidst the ecstatic joy of all humanity. With his last ounce of strength, Papias tried to aim his drill at Buddha, but he was too late, and his soul vanished completely. Zerofuku then materialized as a spirit to express his deep gratitude to Buddha. Together with the 7 lucky gods, Zerofuku ascended to the Pure Land. Buddha gave a happy smile, bidding the boy a final farewell. He then raised his arm high in the exultation of triumph. The 6th match of Ragnarok thus concluded with a glorious victory for Buddha and the human faction. Afterward, Buddha headed inside and reunited with the Valkyrie sisters, Brunhilde and Go. He managed to throw up a peace sign to celebrate the win, but he had no strength left to stand. Everyone quickly rushed him to the medical bay for emergency treatment. Brunhilde sincerely thanked Buddha, knowing that thanks to him, humanity was now one step closer to ultimate victory in Ragnarok. Returning to Beelzebub, he was extremely disappointed that Papias had lost. At that moment, Odin arrived and subtly warned him not to interfere with the upcoming matches that Odin had long anticipated. With the score tied at 3-3, Zeus was determined to do whatever it took to ensure the gods won the next round. Suddenly, Hades approached Zeus and volunteered to fight in the 7th match. His motive was simple: to exact revenge for his fallen younger brother, Poseidon. Hearing that the next opponent was the king of the underworld made Brunhilde extremely anxious. She reasoned that if their opponent was a king, humanity's representative must also be a king. That person was none other than the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. Smashing through the walls of the Valhalla arena, he made his grand entrance, boldly declaring that wherever he walked, the path would naturally form before him. And with that, this summary covering the first 2 seasons of the war between gods and mankind comes to a close. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Goodbye, and see you in the next one.